Time to pay the piper, went onto the wire, revenge of everything. You play the fool, still we dance around your flames, and we don't give a shit.
Well, hello there, my friends. So happy you're here. DollyWould, the podcast, episode 1. Dun dun dun. I'm so incredibly excited to release this, not just because it is the first episode, but really it was just a great conversation. I was fortunate enough to have the lovely, amazing, and talented Hollander in the studio. We got to rap out about her musical journey, writing her last record, navigating the COVID storm as a musician and an artist, and everything in between. And it was just a great dialogue, and it was a great time. And so I'm really excited for you all to join us on that. And without further ado, let's get it going.
Now there's nowhere to hide. Almost on a fire, I got the lighter. I'm pour the gasoline. Time to pay the piper.
Don't worry about that.
Woohoo!
All right, it's officially live.
Yeah!
Podcast numero uno.
Hell yeah!
What are we drinking first?
We're drinking first. Both of them.
Both of them?
Both of them.
What is that?
This is Northern Pines Sunny Vibes Mexican Lager.
Hi, Yaz.
We have to drink it all.
Okay.
And at least half of it. Dolly said that he was going to do 2 shots for every one of my shots tonight.
Totally. in my charred glass.
Yep.
Yeah,
I have a broken glass today.
I know. All right, so podcast number 1 official with the lovely Hollander.
Yeah! Lovely!
Who else would be number 1?
Remember that, bitches!
The answer is no one.
Cheers. Don't cut your face.
Don't cut my face. My glass broke, and so now I have a charred glass, as she likes to call it.
I specifically said shard.
That is 2 shots.
Yeah, I know. I told you.
I almost had it in one. That would have been not wise. Oh, God.
I wish it would have happened.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Yes.
So here we are. It is early November.
Still 2020.
Still 2020. Apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
Election still unknown. COVID still a mystery.
Still terrified.
Still terrified. Everyone's butthole is puckered right now because there's no idea what's happening. But there's a towel
Thank you.
right there if you need it. So speaking of COVID,
Mhm.
how has Hollander been weathering the COVID storm?
Without sounding like a total jerk, kind of like a boss.
Hell yeah.
Because I think that, not to take away from the heartbreak and the turmoil that a lot of people are experiencing with loss of family members or dealing with illness themselves or loss of jobs as well. I think that during this time, I had a few goals in mind, which is obviously to stay healthy, to help my community out, but also just to sit down and write shit. Get to work. I knew that I couldn't play shows, which was fine. It still sucks. But I feel like if I can just write during this time and come up with material,
Yeah.
then I don't really have an excuse, and it doesn't feel like a break.
Right.
It still feels like
Right.
life is still here. I still have today to be able to do shit. So
Cheers to
been
that.
good.
Yeah. You've been killing it. You've
Yeah.
been busy.
Yeah, I've been
You've
sending
been
you all my
saying
songs.
I know. So many songs. So for those of you who don't know, I had the privilege to work with Hollander from the beginning.
Yes.
And play on our records.
Yes.
And
Slay on my records.
help produce From the Ashes.
Hell yeah.
So that's a little backstory on that. Also, we've known each other. I mean, you were my roommate once.
We've known each other for so long.
So long.
I think it's like
I gotta
14 years?
carry I gotta do carry the one to do the
Yeah.
math.
Yeah.
I
think it's been like 14 years.
long time.
Yeah.
I still remember. I remember when you lived with us, and you were just starting to play guitar,
Oh my God.
and you're
trying
with
so hard.
with Jay.
And
Brian
Brian Bell. Yeah.
It's funny is that it's his name's Brian Bell, but we all call him Jay. When I say we all, I really just probably mean me and Dennis.
I was
probably.
gonna say I don't think I ever called him
I
Jay.
think that we just called him Jay. And what's funny is to this day, I still am just like, oh, Jay.
I was trying to think. I was like, wait, who's Jay?
Yeah.
No, it's
Brian
for
Bell.
me, Brian Bell. For
Brian
you,
Bell,
Jay.
which is yeah.
Yeah.
What's super funny is have Brian Bell come up out of nowhere, but
Ugh.
I remember totally you starting to play guitar and playing with him and trying to work on doing the playing and singing and all that.
He taught me the G chord. Thank you.
Yeah.
My favorite chord.
His favorite chord. God, so many places that I could go with that.
You're listening. Shout out to you.
G Unit represent.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, but it's been a long road since then.
I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for lasting and not running for the hills like 90% of my friends.
I mean, I feel like there may have been times where I ducked in the hills for a while.
Rightfully so.
Yeah.
A bish cray.
But yeah. But From the Ashes, hold on, let me finish. I gotta finish my tequila before I start refilling on booze.
Don't mix it up.
Oh, it's a good burn.
Yeah.
Well, what's funny is that you had hit me up several times
Mm-hmm. Like a stalker.
to help with music, and wow, I forgot about the charred glass. And you'd hit me up several times to basically, you're like, hey, I got these ideas. I want to get serious about music, and I know that. Well, I don't even know if you know this, but I remember hearing you tell me about it. I was like, yeah, totally.
I totally, absolutely remember exactly what happened.
Well, I was like, yeah, totally. I'm sure you totally serious about it. And I was like, well, we'll see. So I let you hit me up probably for 6 months. You probably
Yeah, like a stalker.
yeah. And then finally I was like, all right, let's sit down, let's figure it out. And then I remember we went to LTH, and you're
Mhm.
like, I'm serious. I want to get down. I got some stuff. I want to get to work.
And I
Let's
feel like I
fucking
led you on
go.
a little bit too because I think I only had 2 songs
Yeah.
really at that time.
Yeah.
But I had so many ideas.
So many ideas.
This never ending
Yeah.
just closet full of ideas.
Yeah.
But I remember I think you came to one of my shows at a brewery in Vista, right?
Mhm.
Barrel Harbor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yo, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's when I made you a believer.
You did.
Yes!
Not really. Because I was not sure. Because I know that I was like, okay, she
Everyone
has some
talks.
stuff. Yeah.
Everyone talks.
Well, and at the time I was super busy. So I was probably trying to be somewhat protective of my time.
Yes.
And then, but I remember I went and saw it, and I was like, holy shit. And I was like, okay, let's go. And we went.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And I
feel like
remember
we got to work real soon after that. It felt
yeah,
like. Yeah.
we definitely hit the ground running after that.
Yeah.
I remember we went and worked at Nathan James' studio. Shout out
Yes.
to Oceanside
Yeah.
Oceanside legend, Fallbrook legend, Oceanside legend,
Nathan James.
Yeah. I remember we went and worked with him in his studio and started kind of trying to hash some stuff out in the early stage. And I had brought Trevor came in and
Yep.
played on bass.
Yep.
Did we have anyone
I
doing
think it was
electric?
just us four.
I think it was just us.
Nathan,
Yeah. Oh, and then Nathan
you,
was
and he
was
was
kind of,
he was like tracking some stuff on some
yeah,
guitar too. Yeah.
yeah. And we were not ready.
We're
We
not
were
even
not prepared.
close.
And that was kind of in that moment, I was like, oh shit. Like
Yeah.
this, we are not,
Yeah.
like, need some work.
A lot of work.
It was a different dynamic. Cause I'd always been, cause this was going to be new landscape for me going into working with you in that capacity, because I'd always worked in the studio with bands that I was a part of, and we had started and written songs and played those songs for a fairly long amount of time, and then we're going into the studio as kind of a reactionary
Yep.
matter to say, hey, we got all these songs that you've been coming to listen to, now we want to give them to you to actually listen to at home or whatever. And so we had them pretty established and worked out, and so this was one of the times where we came in and they were raw.
Like super.
um
I didn't have a lot of direction. I didn't know how to think past creating something
yeah,
and then singing to it. I didn't know how to get through that. And I felt like that's kind of what I learned during
right.
that process, especially.
Yeah, well, especially when you play as a band and you've had people who have contributed to building it. It's a different process than when you don't have people who have kind of, I don't, manipulation probably isn't the best term, but have had their stamp on it, and they have, because when you have people who are involved, they steer it a direction
Yeah, like
based
their
on,
artist interpretation is so different from person to person.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so what happens is that would have been the case, but this wasn't a Hollander band. This was for you.
Yeah.
And they were your songs. And so that was for me, this was a rad experience in walking through that with you, and really dedicating to spending time with you in the songs, and f- kind of helping find direction,
Yeah.
and then figuring out how to articulate that, and how to musically make that kind of happen and bring those songs to life, in just a way different way. And then and with me not being a musician, always a joke that drummers aren't actually musicians; they're just happy to play with some. But
Rude. Whoever said that is rude.
hey,
That's
I ain't
not
even mad at
nice.
it. I'm not
That's
even mad at
not
it.
nice.
Yeah, it's true though. It's-
You're the foundation.
But I mean, we make the booty go, but but at the end of the day, though, I mean, so it's like I went in there without, like, I don't play guitar. I don't play piano. I just was trying to trust my ear of what I felt sounded right, and bounce that off of what I was discerning out of your vision,
Yeah.
and kind of, and that process. I mean, we could probably talk about that. I'm interested to hear your experience going through. So we moved from, basically with Nathan James, we kind of, once we kind of heard the songs, it was great. It was going in a great direction, but we realized that we were not prepared, and
Yes.
that we needed to do some work.
Yeah.
And then we went and worked with Tommy. Shout out to Tommy,
Mhm.
one of the homies over at
Yeah.
Cinematic,
Yeah.
which that became like our home for 2 years. It felt like.
Yeah. It
Was it
really
2
did.
years?
It was.
It was like almost
It was
2
a
years.
long ass
Yeah.
time. I felt like it was, in some ways, like my second home during those 2 years. I felt like we were there a lot, spending a lot of time developing. And to me, that was the most priceless time right there
Yeah.
in working through these songs, because it taught me that the lens that I view, or that I have always viewed the songs in, is not always the lens that I need to view it in, and to kind of be willing to switch gears and get uncomfortable with not knowing, like, the position of what the final product is going to be,
Yeah.
but like trusting that, to allow these like growing pains and to allow it to be uncomfortable, because we're not doing a service, we're doing a disservice to the songs if we're trying to please me instead of trying to like give our best to the song itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
That's what
always,
I feel like
yeah.
you taught me the most of, is to stop looking at the song as the way that I have always
Right.
thought of it, because that might be good, but it's not necessarily um doing the most for the song that maybe it deserves.
Right. No, I feel like that was a journey for us both on that, was like constantly just chasing the songs,
Yeah.
and trying to see. And there was times where a couple of the songs I remember, because I mean, I just think as artists, and we just get that mentality of, I see this way, and maybe I see it this way just because that's just the way I've done it.
And for me,
It was
yeah.
just like that's what I was doing. So
And
that's how I know it.
totally, and as a gigging musician, I feel like because I was only playing with myself for, it had to have been at least a few years at that
Mhm.
time, only playing by myself for so long, playing through these songs, knowing, okay, this is how they go, and then getting to the studio and being like, no, 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 we're gonna change the time signature on this one.
Yeah.
And but it ended up being the most genius, brilliant idea. And
Uh,
I feel like the luckiest human to have been able to experience that kind of um growth spurt. Like that's how it felt to me. It was like a
well,
breaking down and rebuilding.
yeah. And I would say that, that experience, using like that specific moment too, for me, was another moment, because that was a moment that I realized that you were more dedicated to the sound and the end result than you were to your own pride and ego. And because I mean, I literally took one of your songs that you played all the time and that you loved, and I basically said, "Hey, I really like that this is how you've been doing it, but we're gonna flip it upside down. You're not gonna do it completely different. You're gonna not do it that way.
I'll
You're gonna."
never forget playing the metronome and you counting out 6/8 time for me and me being like, "Wait, do I come in here?" It felt like
Yeah.
double dutch, when people are like trying to like do double dutch and they're like trying to time when to come in. Like I still have never mastered that
No idea.
game
That's not.
either.
Yeah.
Where they do like the two ropes. Like
Yeah.
this.
That's never.
Can't
Yeah.
do it. Can't do it. I
Yeah.
just not gifted like that. But that's how it felt. It was like trying to know like when to come in, like when do I
Mhm.
jump in, and then finally I think you were like, let's just turn off. Like I'm not going to say the time anymore. Just feel it.
Mhm.
And that to me is like when it clicked and I was like, holy shit, we just made a hit. Like that's
Yeah.
literally how it felt.
Yeah.
But it was because I trusted you. I think that your vision for music, like you're such a gifted drummer. You're such a gifted drummer. Obviously, I mean everybody in this town wants you
Yeah.
as a drummer.
Totally.
Um
You didn't have to preface it.
But I think that like even beyond your skills as a drummer, your gift in your ear is like one of the most valued things like that I see in you, is how you're able to just hear things and think outside the box. I think that that's what made you such a good producer on this album, was thinking outside the box. I thought it was incredible.
I appreciate that. I
Yeah.
think you're crazy, but
Yeah. Telling the truth. I'm gonna
That's
take my jacket off. I'm sweating.
because you got. Oh, it's a vest. I was like, you got a sweatshirt.
It's the best. But it's
Oh, yeah. That was definitely like such a pivotal moment. I think when we were working on the record, I think like that was like a turning point.
yeah. Oh. Yes. I felt like it was totally a turning point. And super eye-opening to like what it could be.
Hmm.
Um, I think I always had faith in you because I kind of felt like I had to. Like I was,
I was like, all you had.
Yeah. Felt like I was like going down a hill like with no brakes, and I was like, well, we're in
Yeah.
it, and it was the
You
best
choke up
thing.
on the mic a little bit.
Oh, sorry. It
Sorry.
was the best thing, I think, to be able to have that. To be able to have that, like, okay, we're full in.
Yeah.
It was like such a risk, but the best possible
Yeah.
risk.
Well, I think we both kind of went all in at that moment. We're like, oh, and then especially when it works.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. I was like, I'm gonna be the first to tell you, I got ideas. They ain't all good. I'm not gonna pretend they're all good, but it's great when they work. And it's one of those things where it's like you throw enough ideas at the wall, you're gonna end up with enough that stick.
Hell
Or
yeah.
every now and then you might get one that stick. And that one I was definitely
Oh, it was the
that's one of my
best.
favorite songs for
Same.
sure.
Same.
Um, but that was
I feel like I'm the opposite of how most musicians look at their stuff. Like, I feel like sometimes people go through their music and they're like, "Oh, I'm over it." Like, I still fucking love every single track
yeah,
on that record. Like,
rad.
every single one. And I feel like I don't know, the emotional attachment that I have listening to it, I feel like that comes across not just to me, but I feel like other people feel that, like
Yeah.
how it transcended that moment
Hmm.
and it like lives in the song.
Mm-hmm.
What we were able to do. It was incredible. It was the best. I can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, that was a long trying period. Like I said, it was a learning experience for both of us. I mean, that was a new experience for me in particular. In I mean, I felt for me there was a lot of weight because there was like these are your like songs, and I'm sitting here going like she's entrusted me to like see this through,
Yep.
and if they turn out shitty,
They would not.
that's gonna be on me.
They would not. They would not. I wouldn't be
But-
working. We wouldn't have invested that much time.
Oh no, I would have aborted way earlier.
100% you would have. I think that there were a few times where we were like, I don't know if this is a good idea. But it needed to feel that way. And also, I just think that like the stops into Larry, like on our way
Mhm.
into the studio was like the best thing that we could have done. Just
Yeah.
like taking some shots and then going to work.
Yeah.
That helped a
Shout
lot.
out to Larry's Beach Club.
Yeah, Larry's. I love your bar stools.
They
so
are comfortable.
comfortable.
Yeah, I know. It's genius. I've spent a lot of time in those bar stools.
Because you can't leave. You're
Yeah.
too comfortable.
Yeah.
I'd say they're a lot longer for sure. It's so much fun.
Definitely a benefit. Just note to anyone out there, if you are approaching a studio and there is not a bar within walking distance, go to a different studio.
Go to a different studio. It's not the one for
Yeah.
you.
And you can bring booze, but it's just not the same. There's something
So
about
different.
being able to leave and go, hey,
Yep.
let's go walk 12 feet
Yeah.
and take
Yeah.
a shot and figure it out.
Yeah. Well, and stepping out of like one atmosphere that's like so serious and so much anxiety, and then stepping into another atmosphere, which is like everything we love, chaos and the clinking of glass and smells of stale liquor. Like, I miss that so
Everything.
much.
I was just saying, I was like, now, as like you say, like I'm starting to salivate a little bit. I'm kind of like, I'm starting to get jittery. I'm like, let's go.
I miss it.
I know.
I miss it.
That is one of the things that has been, with COVID, I'm such a busy person in terms of I've just always been that way. I don't know why. I don't know what it is. It's probably some psychological dysfunction. But I've always just been someone who's kept a full plate, and I also have FOMO.
No way.
So it's like I'm busy, but then also I want to go out and do all the extracurriculars, which by extracurriculars I mean drinking. And COVID was such a gnarly slowdown, in the sense of like, I think that we talk about all the things that are obvious, like businesses, businesses are affected, or how like people are making money is being affected, and obvious social distance things. But man, for people who are like used to being with people, and like I thrive off that. I just love being around people. I could
Yeah.
be with no one I know.
And you're still feeling like it's feeding your soul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's so you talk about that. That's like it's been a trip
Oh, I
to
miss it so much.
yeah.
Like how like your feet would stick to the ground.
Yeah.
Some
Where
chick
you-
screaming in your ear.
Oh.
Oh, God, I miss you, chick who would scream in my ear.
all the things you took for
Yeah,
granted.
all of the things. I used to get so annoyed by those bitches. They're like, I just want another shot. Like, I miss her.
Yeah.
I miss
I'd buy her
her.
another shot right
I'd buy
now.
her several shots.
Yeah.
I buy her all the shots.
Oh, take me to there.
I want to go to there. I do though. I was like low key worried about like a lot of us that are in that kind of arena because I think that I mean no one really knew what to expect with this or how it was gonna like hit us.
Right. Well, I mean, we went into this where it was like, hey, you guys are going to stay at home for 2 weeks.
I knew it
And
was
that
gonna
was
be
like
2 weeks. I knew
7
they were
months ago.
lying.
8 months ago. I don't
It's
even know
like-
how many months ago. 12 years ago.
12 years ago, yeah. It's like that girl that's like, I'll be ready in 5 minutes, and then she's not ready for like 3 hours.
Yeah,
like
that's every woman ever.
That's Gavin Newsom. Like
Yeah.
he did that to us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been an interesting time navigating it all.
Yeah.
But going back to how, where we started, is like you're someone that I point to people like all the time. Because you've managed to stay busy and you've managed to like make shit happen. And I feel like so often I'm looking at, so whether it's people that artists I'm involved with playing with, or people that I'm booking or just coming in contact with, and so many people are just sitting on their hands, and it's been such an interesting and frustrating thing. And also like I have to acknowledge that I'm just not wired that way, and
Yeah.
some people are wired differently. But I just feel like they're going to lose out on some insane opportunities, because the reality is that opportunities are there, but the people who are going to get them are the people like yourself who are like, I'm going to go make them. Like you kind of have to like make the opportunity. And so you've found ways to do live streaming, especially at the beginning, you're doing a ton of live streaming.
Right, yeah.
You're doing that. And then as a band, we did like a live stream.
Yeah,
that
we did.
Band Together.
Yeah.
A little plug. That one's
Yeah.
on Spotify.
Yeah, check it out. Check it out.
And you did that as a band to kind of keep things going. And then, but like even so, like the pop-up gigs at people's homes, and like, just, which has been such a cool thing to see as a community. Like that's been one of the coolest things to see.
I think so too.
Like watching a community say, hey, times are really fucking weird right now, and we want live music, and we know that this is a big thing for you. Like, how do we make this like thing happen?
Yeah.
And like kind of adhere to all this stuff. And whether or not, I'm not going to get into whether or not it's like the whole thing about whether or not there should be live entertainment or not. Like,
Yeah.
I don't really give a shit.
Same.
But seeing people as a community come in and say, hey, I got a driveway and I got a neighborhood who's ready.
Yeah.
And if you want to come hang out, you can hang out my driveway, and we'll create a social distance environment, and you put a tip jar out there, and we'll pay whatever the situation is.
God,
And
I love it.
it's been so cool to see those things happen. And it's things like that where I'm sitting here and I'm looking at how many people are just sitting on their hands, and I'm like, what are you fucking doing right now?
I think
Like-
that it's I see both sides of it.
Yeah.
And I think that I see
better
both
human
sides
than
of
me.
it. Well, no, I don't think I'm better. I think I was that person that would just sit in a standstill. And so I can sympathize with that a little bit more. I think that there's a lot of fear too, and fear is something that for me, especially in music, was something that was really hard for me to get over.
Mhm.
And then especially when you're like throwing apocalypse into it, like it definitely
Yeah.
changes things like significantly. But I remember we were talking one time. I was talking with your wife about this last week, I think it was, maybe a couple weeks ago. But I was talking to her about it, and there was a time where you had said you were like, I think I was like only playing like maybe once every couple weeks. I wasn't playing often. And you were like, look, like if this is something you want to do, like, would you rather be sitting at home doing nothing, knowing it's not furthering your career? Would you rather be like working your ass off, knowing that
Yeah.
like every time you play, it progresses you in some way, shape, or form. And it just clicked in my head for some reason. And like pre-COVID, we were doing like sometimes like 4 to 6 shows a week. And then post COVID, I was like, I can't do that. Like I can't go down to just nothing. And so seeing some of these like more like famous artists do these like live streams, I was
Mhm.
like, oh shit, like this is genius. This is so smart. So I started doing live streams just from my couch, and then it got way too hot in my house, and I was like, "Let's take it outside."
Uh,
And so we did, and it kind of morphed into those driveway shows, and I'm so grateful because um, it brought back the things that we love about being in a bar. It brought that back to just being on a driveway,
mhm.
and that like sense of community and that celebration of just being together, I think was something that we miss. And there was social distancing for sure. Like everybody would be sitting on their own driveway or like definitely 6 feet apart. And they were very good about that. But that sense of like community came back again. And it felt like healing to me. I'm sure it felt like that for them just based upon what I've heard. But I felt like it did more work for my soul than maybe it did for theirs.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of those things where, you know, we take for granted sometimes. So when pre all of this, when we talk about that, and uh, it's those things were just opportunities that were there all the time, and we were able to kind of pick and choose as we want,
Mhm.
and so I think in these times where you're thirsty, it's like when you're like you've been in a drought
Yeah.
and you're super thirsty, and that one drop is like the most satisfying.
Yep.
And it's like, but when you have a glass full of those drops, you don't think about it all
Yep.
the time because you're like, I could just drink that whenever. And I'm never really thirsty because I'm constantly just drinking it.
Yeah.
But it's like in the situations like that where you're like, everything's been flipped upside down, and the thing that gives me life is kind of been ripped out from under everyone. And goes for musicians and artists, but also for consumers, people
Mhm.
who are just people who love music and just want to be around music and are used to being able to show up and go hear music whenever they want. That's the kind of the feedback I've received from people that I've talked to who have been to the driveway shows or who have been to like a couple of spots like Coomber or
Yeah.
the Vineyard 1924 where there's some degree of live music happening, and people have all said they're like, I just need this, like
Yep.
um I think they're just hungry and they're thirsty for it, and I just think it's that much more satisfying. And so I feel like that's probably, I know for me, like, not just being, I talk about just being someone who's out all the time, but most of the time I was out was had to do with either going to go see buddies play, or I'm out at shows to go see bands that I, admire and I'm inspired by,
Yeah.
being able to go see them play, around wherever. And yeah, so I think that that's just been a huge underrepresented mental loss to some
Agreed.
degree, because that definitely has like an effect on your psyche and on your emotional stability, like all those things,
Totally
like
does.
especially if you're people who are like, those are the things that give you life.
Yeah. Well, and when you're doing it so much, there
Yeah.
was one. I spoke to one journalist, and she called musicians like musicians and artists alike the silent sufferers during
Hmm.
this time, and that like made me like super emotional. I'm not gonna cry right now because I'm not gonna. But I feel like it's such an interesting thing um how like it's almost like you can't really talk about how it's been like tough. Like I
Right.
can't even imagine. I feel lucky as a singer-songwriter who I could just take my guitar somewhere and plug in and play like on a driveway, but I can't imagine how like maybe you feel because band shows are very
Mhm.
far and few between. Like how do you feel having not like played in a long time?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Honestly, at first, I was fine
Yeah.
because I was doing so much, and the forced break was almost like a sense of relief. It was like
Mm.
a forced sit down, like that you do to like a kid, like when a kid's being rambunctious and you put his little ass in the corner, and you're like, you didn't necessarily do anything wrong. Like you just need to chill. Like that's kind of how it felt, and it was like one of those things. At first, I was like, oh, like this is kind of cool. Like not being committed to 1,500 different things. But over time, yeah, it definitely started to kind of wear. And especially because, I'm involved in so many projects too. And it was like some of them were trying to find ways and others are not. And it was just kind of one of those things where, it was just a weird space. Fortunately, though, like, you know, here where we're at my studio space, rehearsal space, like, you know, I have a space to come if I want to. I can come play and play along to whatever I want. Truth be told, I honestly haven't done that as much as I should have. Um, there's been a slight degree of almost laziness in that area where I kind of just and I've almost been like, it's okay right now because I know that at some point it's gonna. And I'm just that way when it comes. Like I
Yeah.
just am all in on things all the time. So I've kind of just been going through a season of letting myself be kind of just
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, I mean, it's 2020. Like you're allowed. Like I feel like
Yeah.
there's no rule book
Yeah.
for how to like experience a pandemic and experience like uh things being shut down the way that
Yeah.
they have. And so I feel like if there is a time for you to like not know what to do or to like not be as aggressive in like your attempts, like now's the time for sure.
Yeah. And you're at some point too, your hands are kind of, at least in my position too, my hands are kind of tied
Yeah.
to, it's kind of just depends on what everyone else in the bands that I'm affiliated with are doing and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely been weird. But it's been cool in the sense that I've been able, like that time I've had to kind of step back from a lot of things, and I've been able to kind of just reassess things and things I'm involved in, um, and kind of look at them more clearly. Because when you're in the middle of things, you can't really see the big picture.
No.
And for me, especially, like I have like the big picture's like a puzzle that's just completely fucked up in a box. And it's like, but I'm constantly working as you're putting it together. All these things I'm involved in are all these little miniature puzzles I'm working, and I can't really see the big picture of them. I just know that each one I'm working on is its own little area in that bigger
Yeah.
puzzle that I'm kind of piecing. And
Yeah.
I feel like this time I was able to almost like reassess, and I was able to go back and look at the puzzle box
Cool.
and be like, look at it and be like, oh, this is the big picture of everything, um, and kind of evaluate where I'm at. And for me, also, like this is coming, like the whole pandemic thing came in an interesting time too, because of where I was at personally, and like also with like our business,
Yeah.
so with our tea company, having had the coffee and tea shop.
Shout out to Loose Leaf Tea. We love you so much.
So we had our tea shop in downtown Oceanside, and like ran like a coffee bar essentially, and we worked our ass off
Oh my God, yes.
in that season,
All the time.
and it was the gnarliest, most hectic, most trying, crippling season I've ever gone through.
Wow.
And it was one of those things though, like, but you just put your head down, you keep going. You don't even know how deep you are, because you're like, I can't look to see how far like in the hole I am right now, because I just have to keep fucking finding a way to like make up the ground. And that's
Yeah.
where we were for years. And then we sold our lease and our space there, and we got our warehouse space, and then I was able to build out the rehearsal and recording space here. And I, and so much of my identity was in that space. And then all of a sudden that's kind of gone. And I have the freedom now to go do all these other things. And then just as I have the freedom to kind of just go, oh my God, I'm wide open. I can commit to everything. I could go hard in the paint. And then all of a sudden it's like, just kidding.
Damn it!
And then this thing, and it was such like it was just a weird timed thing. Granted, that being said, like, I'm not gonna, it's, I, there's so many people out there that are in like really gnarly situations. And I feel so fortunate and grateful that, we're in the position that we are. And we've been able to navigate with our business and everything kind of through all of this and find our way. And it's been with a lot of pivoting and a lot of things. Um, but for me personally, it's been like, it kind of forced this weird feeling of almost like an early retirement. I joke about that so much.
Don't say that. Don't.
Well, I joke about it. All right. So here's my philosophy on this though. I always joke about like people are like, Dolly, like it feels like you're fucking retired. Like you're like you go golf all the time. You're like
You do.
I do.
You
I do.
100% do.
Yeah, and I'm not getting better, which is terrible. But it's kind of interesting. I constantly battling this thing of like feeling that I should be doing something bigger. And I always have that kind of sense, but now more than ever, I kind of have this thing where I'm like, I feel like I'm fucking up because like for so long I was so like overwhelmed by that side of the business and I was over my head all the time and I was working insane hours and then going and doing all the music stuff on top of it. And it's like, and then I go now and I'm like, well, we don't have that. And I've managed to work my way out of so much of our business to where, my wife runs a good portion of it. And then the rest of it kind of runs itself between just the processes and employees to where like I have just no major role. And there's this thing of feeling like I feel like I should be like, should I go get a job? Like, should I go like apply at Costco or something?
Yes.
So it's like one of those where like I'm constantly battling this thing of just feeling like that's what I need to do because I'm such the type of person where like, well, I need to be doing something. I need to find a way. But at the end of the day, the other side of this is I'm like, when am I ever going to be in the position that I'm in now to have we have the enough financial stability to where we're not dependent on me having to go make money necessarily. Like the business, in between, my wife sustains kind of our personal stuff. And, there's enough music stuff going on to where, it kind of covers other of my personal, like dumb expenses. But it's been an interesting place of just being okay with being like, you know what, I may never get to be in this position again. And I have so many friends around me who and this is not a diss on that mentality at all. Like I appreciate it and I respect it and I think it's great, but who are working for retirement at 65 years old, which by then probably is going to be more like 70 years old.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things where in my head, I go, well, how free are you at 70? Like, I'm at a spot now where at 34 years old, I can do anything.
Yep.
And I could do anything.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I don't know.
I think that's where we're kind of twisted because I feel like that way too. I don't want to live my whole life just to get to one place so I can say I lived my life to get there.
Right.
Like I want to live for right now. Like I really do believe like with every fiber of my being that I'm not promised tomorrow, that
Right.
I I don't know what tomorrow holds. I don't know what I'm going to be doing next week. Like, to me, right now is like what matters. And I think that's why I feel this like drive to try and make every day count. And I'm not saying that every day I'm like hustling, but I try. Like, I try to do something that will make that day count. But I think right now for people like us, where we're so used to just hustling hard, now we're trying to have to figure out like how do we pivot
Mhm.
in a time and in a culture like we're in right now. Like
Yeah.
how do we make that work? And there's no rule book and there's a shit ton of rules, and so it's like
As irony, there's no rule book, but there's
there's
a lot of rules.
shit ton of rules.
Yeah. Yeah,
Rough.
it is.
Rough. But you're doing this.
This is definitely
How did you come upon this?
so. I mean, this is it. Doing this podcast was. I feel like it was a long time coming, in the sense that it's been something that I've thought about, and then it's also I've had so many people at different times, just through conversations or whatever, that have brought it up. They're like, "Dude, you should do a podcast, or you
Yep.
should, like, you know." So it's always been something that's been in the back of my mind, and I struggled with for a while trying to figure out how or what I wanted to do,
Mhm.
which is going to be kind of funny when I get to how I'm actually doing it. But because in my head, because it's just the way I work, is that I was thinking like, oh yeah, okay, this is great. I could do that. And I started like, I have all these notes from probably like 2 years ago where I started brainstorming like how I would do a podcast. And I had like all these different segments. Like I was fucking NBC News or something. Like, oh, I'm gonna do like New Music Friday, and I'm gonna do this thing, and I'm gonna do that, and like I had this, and I'm gonna go through like, and I was just so overthinking it for so long
That you didn't do it.
that yeah, I just was,
Yeah.
and in my head I was like, that's just too much for one. It's just too much, and in my head I'm like, I just was like, I don't know that that's really makes sense. And Megan and I were on a 2-week road trip,
So
where we went
beautiful.
through like Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Utah, Nevada, camping. And so, I mean, we covered 3,000 miles, like
Incredible.
70 hours of driving.
The pictures were dumb.
That was a once in a
It
lifetime kind of
didn't
experience
look
for us.
real.
Yeah, it
Like
was great.
real. Every day that you would post or she'd post, I'd be like, Rob, look, like just so in
Yeah.
love with where you guys were. I mean, it seemed so magical.
It was. I mean, it's one of those things where, I've been in Southern California most of my life, and I've traveled to different parts of the country at different times, but I'd never like seen that side of the country. And I'm not a sightseer. Like I don't they like sightseeing doesn't really do anything for me. Like Megan's so opposite. Like for her, like she sees like anywhere we go, she could see like the smallest mountain ever, and she's like, "Oh my god, the mountain. Ah, I'm so happy to be here."
I love it so
And
much.
I'm so not that way. Like, it's like we could be at this grandiose thing, and I'm like, yeah, totally. And it's just not what feeds me. Like
Yeah.
people and experiences in that dynamic are what really feed
That's
me.
your thing. Yeah.
But this was one of those things where just driving and just kind of taking it in, and it was just so much of it was breathtaking,
Yeah.
and it was such an adventure. Every day was a different day. We didn't stay. I mean, we didn't stay anywhere really more than one day.
Amazing.
So it was drive anywhere from 3.5 to 6 hours, find a spot, set up camp, and find a way to make dinner, enjoy the spot we had till we were too tired, and then we'd go to bed. And then we'd wake up and we'd have breakfast, try to make coffee. And when I say try to make coffee, also I want to note,
Yeah. Tell us.
God. So we're bougie as fuck when it comes to coffee.
I don't think anyone who knows you is shocked by that statement. I just want to say,
Yeah.
continue.
Probably not. So having owned a coffee and tea shop, we have this great espresso machine at home. And we got the bright idea that why don't we bring the espresso machine with us on our camping trip? So I bought a fucking generator to power said espresso machine just so we can have bougie ass lattes in the morning out in the middle of nowhere. And after like the second day, the freaking steam wand got clogged or something and it stopped working. So I just had to lug this espresso machine and generator around for several other days and drink shithouse coffee before I realized that's what happened. And all I had to do was clean the tip. That was it. That was it. Clean your tip.
Note to self.
Clean your tip.
Clean your tip. Everyone.
Don't get clogged up. Clean your tip. Anyway. So, going back. Got me all pumped up. Feel like I just had freaking shot of espresso. So we're on this journey, several hours driving, and we started talking about the idea of the podcast. And my wife is such an encourager. She has been like, she's just one of those people that, you know, when we met and all that, she just was always been the type to say, these are the things that make you who you are. And she pushes me to just do those things. When so often you would expect for your spouse to give you shit or grief because you might be gone 3 or 4 nights a week or whatever, or you might be gone for a week at a time or whatever the case may be. And she has just always seen it as like, these are the things that make you you. And why would you do anything else? Like, I fell in love with you and those are things that make you you. So why would I not promote those things?
Such a beautiful story.
Which is one of those things that like seems like such a aha, like duh kind of thing, but it's not.
Oh, it's so rare.
It's so rare.
Oh, it's so rare.
Yeah. And
but it's true. She totally supports you and totally pushes you to be all things you.
Yeah.
That's what makes her such a freaking angel.
It's crazy. And
love you so much, Meg.
Yeah. You're the best.
The best.
But so we started talking about the podcast and then what would happen is we'd be driving and I'd be in the middle of Wyoming and be a 2-hour stretch and I would just start thinking like through, well, what could it look like? All the while also we're listening to podcasts. So it's kind of one of those things where I kind of had this thing where I started thinking, well, what is it that I am drawn to? Because at the end of the day, like a lot of the things that I end up doing are, I mean, not to say that they're fully selfish, but there's definitely selfishness in them. Like, I'm just being real. Like, if I'm, like, I say this all the time. Like, it's places where I book music. People are like, oh my God, like, the musicians are great. You're like, no fucking shit. Like, I'm going to be here drinking. Like, I want to hear good shit.
Truth.
So it's like, I'm glad that you enjoy it. But honestly, I just wanted to make sure it was, like, enjoyable for me. I said this when we opened our coffee shop. Like, my go-to drink there, I was like, that was my priority. I don't care if everyone else liked it. It had to be the way that I wanted it because I'm going to be the one to drink it.
Respect, though. Yeah. Respect.
So that's an aside. That's a note. Selfish as fuck. So I'm sitting here thinking, like, what are the things that draw me in? What are the podcasts and these types of things that I'm drawn to? And they've always been more conversational. And, you know, whether it's like Joe Rogan or, you know, on as far as music, I listen, like Chris Shiflett's Walking the Floor is a great podcast. And I've always just enjoyed them because especially like Rogan, like you're able to dive in much deeper and dig into things that you wouldn't have thought about talking about.
Yeah.
And like all my favorite interviews. So like, I'm also, you know, we were talking about this on the way over here, like going down the YouTube, like rabbit hole. And like for me, I find myself going down that kind of hole the most when I'm looking for like interviews. I love hearing people's just perspectives and like why they do what they do. And the interviews that I will say that are always like that I love the most are always the ones that are really long extended forms of them, because it's not someone who showed up with 21 questions to say, well, let me cover the basics here. Well, let's talk about your new record you just put out. And then that's like, you're like, well, because if I go click on the next 4 interviews, they're all going to just
All
be
gonna be
the
the
same
same.
thing.
Truth.
So I always go for like, what's the longest one? And I'll like, when I'm looking for them, I like whatever one's like, if there's something that's over an hour, I'm
You
like, that's my
do?
thing. Oh, full.
Whoa.
That's just because I know that there's going to be so much more substance that I'm going to care about.
Because it makes you feel like you're a part of the conversation.
Right. And I think the thing that does that is when you see those things, so it's not when you're asking you like the list of questions, you've already answered these questions 5,000 times. When you're doing something that's like long form and you're just having a conversation and you might be talking about all of those things, but it's in a way that you see the artist or the person, um you watch them almost find themselves in the middle of the conversation, because they are having to dig into a space that's outside of the thing that's been already rehearsed that they've answered before. And so you're watching them work it out. And that process of watching someone work something out and watching the mishaps or the things that like maybe they like started to come out a way that they weren't intending, and watching them correct it and all of those things, like for me, that tells way more about a person than the regurgitated information that I could have just read in Rolling Stone magazine.
That's gonna change how I listen to every podcast from now on. Because you and we've talked about the Rick Rubin,
Yeah.
like his conversations.
Yep.
And the one he does with Pharrell in particular,
Yep.
I was like, oh my gosh, no.
Oh god.
I took a shot. You have to take another one. And I'm watching for two. And the way that he talks, it's like, congratulations. The way that he talks about it to me is like exactly what you're talking about, because they're not talking about the normal kinds of questions that you would normally hear in a podcast. It's like real shit, like stuff that the public doesn't ever really get to hear about.
His what is the name of that podcast again?
Broken Records.
Broken Record. Yeah. That podcast is definitely Rick Rubin's is like one of those people that you just hear because he's been on fucking everything. Everything that matters. And it's one of those things where like hearing those, so he's definitely one of those ones where obviously when I see someone pop up on there that I know who I'm like really excited, like that's great.
Yeah.
But I spend a lot of time on there regardless of people like, oh, I have no idea who this is.
Yeah.
But just his insight and hearing the stories, because a lot of times, especially when Rick Rubin's on the actual podcast, because sometimes it's not.
There's another guy blanking on his name.
Which is great too.
He's fantastic.
But I love hearing it when it's Rick Rubin and he has some history with them. And like, because it goes back to that, because they'll start talking, like the one he did with the Beastie Boys and them talking about like their early years, and hanging out in Rick Rubin's apartment. And it puts you in a place where like you're looking back and you're like almost visualizing. And it's just crazy how many people he's been involved with in some capacity, and the fact that like how many people he's been involved with where you're like, if I saw you on the street, I would never ever associate you just out of my own ignorance, just of like whatever, but it's just been like I would have never put that together. Like if I just saw you,
with somebody with his background, you would never think like, I swear, I'm like, he's always wearing like a t-shirt and shorts all the time. Short shorts with his hair down and his giant ass beard. And I'm like, damn, like, but your roster's killer. So funny.
Yeah. I mean, you listen to that like stuff with his interview with the Beastie Boys, or his conversation with like Wu-Tang and stuff like that. And you're just like trip, and you're like, oh my God. You're like, dude, this guy's had his hands on
Everything.
so many good things.
Yeah.
And he's so wise. That thing I love is the dude's just filled with infinite wisdom.
Yeah.
Um and yeah, so that's all the kind of stuff that I'm like super drawn to. Um not comparing myself to
I am.
any of those people.
I am.
But in my head,
I would compare you to him.
Yeah,
I would, and I've told you that.
Okay, totally. She's drunk now.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I've told you completely sober before
Yeah.
that I feel like you're a Rick Rubin in the making.
You're a high.
No, I was not high that time.
That time.
Another time.
Anyway, moving on. So basically that's how I end up where I'm at, is that I was just working it out like with Megan verbally, and we were talking about all the things and that I look for. And I kind of just had the conclusion that, like, why am I trying to overcomplicate something that is really fucking simple? Is that why is it I even want to do this? Like, I'm not trying to build a brand around it. I'm not trying to, like, don't get me wrong, all those things are involved in it, but that's not the purpose of it. And I realized for me, like, how much more fulfilling it's going to be when my purpose is to sit like I am with across from you and just have a conversation and do what we're doing, rip shots, drink some lovely beer, just talk and see where it goes. And I love that. Like, we were on the way here, you're like, so what are we going to talk about? Like, what are you going to ask me? And I was like, I literally have no, like,
I was nervous.
no agenda. I have no like direction on what it is, because I just trust that I know you, I know me, I know that like we have enough things that we could talk about.
14 years of knowing each other and being BFFs, duh.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, for me, I don't like, this is what matters to me. It's the conversation, less about entertaining listeners, of which there are none right now.
Yet.
But so it's one of those where, I don't know, I just had that realization that I was like, this is, and then once I kind of came to that, I was like, oh, okay, now let's go.
I think it makes perfect sense. Rob and I talked about it. I don't know if it was like right when you got back from your trip or right before you left for your trip, when you were like thinking about possibly doing something like this. But I mean, we've told you to your face several times before that like you need a podcast, because we just love what you have to say. And maybe we're biased, but I feel like
maybe not Robert.
He loves you. He loves you so much. So much. But I think it's so amazing. And I think that you have your hand in enough areas of music that I feel like are even just us beyond music too. I feel like, I mean, you have so many different connections with so many people that and the things that you pull out of people, it's magic. So I can't wait.
I appreciate that.
Can't wait.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's gonna be fun.
Hell yeah.
That's why I like, when all the like getting it all set up and doing all that, once that was out of the way, it was great just to be like, oh, like, all right, now let's just have fucking fun and let's just do it. Yeah, so I'm excited. It's gonna be, yeah, a bunch of stuff. So here's next question though. What's next? Well, on the Hollander world, in the Hollander world, I guess.
I haven't really talked to anybody about this. I'm nervous. I'm sweating.
God.
I haven't like really talked to anybody about what's next, because I feel like our progress kind of got stunted with the pandemic, and then I feel like we left on such a high note, which to me is like the best way to
That's
like
right. So we had the release party right before all this happened.
It was literally like a month and a half.
And that was one of the funnest fucking nights I've ever had.
I'm gonna write that in my diary later.
That was just hands down. I can remember so many aspects of that night. Just
so much of it. I didn't even
clear,
talk to
which
you
is crazy.
enough.
I can remember any of it
because we were lit.
Yeah, I mean, for real though.
For real.
But I can remember so much of it, so crystal clear, and it was one of those. It was such a special night. All of it, it all came together well. Shout out to the Moose Lodge.
Oh, love you so much. Forever and ever and ever. Love you so hard.
But that was a killer fucking night.
Ugh,
That
it
was
was the
great.
best. It was so much fun.
I wish we had
the whole thing filmed.
documented
I
it
know,
more
dude.
because
I
it
know.
was one of those where it was just exponentially over and beyond what I had expected.
But
And
same
not
though.
that I had low expectations.
I think we both had like decent
Yeah.
expectations. That night blew our minds. Like you couldn't move from point A to point B easily.
Which is,
like
as you're saying this right now, I'm thinking about that, which is crazy to think that that's
sliding
such a
past
weird
everyone.
thing right now.
Oh, I know. I
Like,
know.
even I'm not like someone who's super like,
Sentimental.
well, not super as far as like with being close to people right now isn't like I understand it. It's not a fear. I'm not in that fear.
Mm.
But even still, when like someone kind of gets in my like bubble, like I'm now like programmed to have that thing of be like, yo,
You're too
like,
close to
hey,
me. Yeah.
hey,
Yeah.
6 feet.
Step off.
Yeah. And then but to think about like going back to that, and you
Man.
were like, dude, butts to nuts.
Oh, you said that to me as we were both trying to get to the bar. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm writing that in my diary later. Like 100%. It was butts and nuts the
Yeah.
entire night. It was so amazing. One of the best nights of my life. Can't wait to do it again.
Yeah.
I feel like that was, it really felt like history. I remember walking up, I'm having chills on my face. I remember walking
Chills
up.
on your face. I don't know if
That's
I've
how
ever
I know it's
experienced
good.
that.
That's how I know it's good. Every song that we made, if I didn't have chills on my face, I wasn't stoked. I know 100% of the time, like there's chills on your body, that's fine. But when I get chills on my face, shit's lit.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Respect.
that night, that's how I felt like the whole night. But I remember walking up to there, and to me, like that setting your intention before you step into the space is such a huge thing. And I remember walking up there and being like, we're going to make history tonight. Like that's all I kept on saying to myself was like, we're making history tonight. And seeing how everything went by and watching, from beginning to end, like as soon as we started our VIP hour and then that ended and then we were moving into something else, like it really felt like such a, I don't
It
know,
was a
like,
well-oiled machine.
oh
That worked.
God. It was like it wasn't my first release.
Right.
It was like we'd been doing this.
Yeah.
And and we knew what we were doing.
Right.
But what I in my head in my heart, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. But
Right.
literally, but at the same time, I was like, no, I know what the fuck I'm doing. Like just so weird. And I felt like I had the best possible team and the best people around me. That blew my mind. And that's a time in my life that I will treasure till my last breath. It was the most incredible experience surrounded by the most incredible people. Um, and what music has in the future, I have no idea. But all I know is I just want to keep making good shit. Like that's so I'm just writing a ton of stuff and kind of pivoting a little bit with my sound. But I think it's in a good way. I think that during this shutdown, it's given me time to kind of like reflect, and I have a better idea of like what I want to do moving forward. I'm craving something a little bit warmer. All my music kind of reflects that, like the new stuff that I've been writing kind of reflects that. So I want to lean into that hard
Yeah.
and kind of see what happens. And I'm not really afraid of trying something different. I'm excited and eager.
Yeah.
And then whatever that looks like afterwards, I'm not too concerned about as long as I'm still working towards like pushing the envelope and changing things up and challenging myself and then giving some like a good polished end result. That's all I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that kind of while you were talking about that, it brought up kind of something that I'd been thinking about as we had talked about like moving on to the next record and stuff like that. So when we did From the Ashes, you had these songs and our goal was to serve those songs.
Yep.
And that's kind of the place that we were working from. Whereas now you're in this space where since then you've written a lot of songs. A lot. I mean, there's times where like I've gotten a minimum a song a day. Yeah. And it's like, why haven't you listened to my songs yet? And I'm like, because you sent me like so many of them.
Don't sound like that.
Yeah, totally. And so, but that being said, it's like where you've grown, like, well, like through the original, when we first set out to do that record and watching you grow through building that record and then beyond that, like seeing your mentality and the way that you viewed what you do has changed.
Yeah.
I like watching that has been one of the coolest things. And cuz I've just like you just had like you there was some wrestling, just to say there was some wrestling that was taking place early on.
Yes, but it was needed.
It was, but
I
it was just some
was
clash. It was clashing of ideals and
yeah.
clashing of perspectives.
I took a
And
lot of Xanax.
shout out.
Shout out to Xanax.
Yeah,
Love
how'd I
you.
get a sponsor?
Sponsor me.
Yeah. But I like there's so much of that that I watched unfold in terms of the way you viewed what you did in yourself and the way that you like stepped into the reality of what it was you were trying to do versus the idea of what you were trying to do. And I feel like that's so also like so much of that was kind of helped contribute in terms of like your growth in that as we went into this thing with the pandemic and all that stuff
Yeah.
too. Like it shifted the way you viewed what it means to be an artist.
Yep.
And, because there's a lot more to being an artist than there is being artsy.
Yes.
Being artsy is probably the least amount
It's
that you
the
do as an artist.
smallest. It's the smallest necessary tool
Right.
to being creative.
All the other, there's so many things that you need to do to leverage your space to be artsy.
Yep.
And I feel like there's such like a dynamic that people have that kind of puts the horse before the carriage in the sense that everyone loves the idea of being an artist, but they don't really love the reality of what it means to be an artist
Mhm.
and what you kind of have to do to to navigate through that.
Hell yeah.
And like watching you go through that growth of like coming into saying and then owning it, really like owning it and taking like, okay, this is all right, I am an artist, but I'm also a business and I'm a brand and I'm all these things, and understanding how the kind of the whole vehicle runs and understanding like what you can do to constantly maintain that thing and to have the different assets that are involved kind of pay or attribute to the growth of each other side of the business or side of the artistry or whatever.
Yes.
And so all that to say that going into, for me, it's really exciting thinking about going into the next kind of element is that you're coming into this in a completely different space in full control in
Yeah.
the sense that before it was reactionary. I have these songs and our challenge was to make those songs be what they were. Now we're at a space where you go, I have so many fucking songs, I can do whatever I want.
I do
Honestly,
love that.
I
I
mean,
do. It feels like I feel like I stopped I didn't stop being creative. I expanded on it. I think that there's like a minimum amount of creativity it takes. And I don't say this to like take away from the fact that like it takes a lot of effort to write a song.
mhm,
I don't mean it that way. I mean it in the fact that like that's the step one. But in order for you to be successful in your creativity, there's so many other things that have to take place. And I felt like the business part of it is the thing that I needed to work on the most.
mhm.
And you taught me a lot about that on how to take a song as it's written and expand upon it. And I think that that's kind of where I tried to lean in a little bit, and I became I'll go through these periods where I'm so obsessed with creating something, but not just creating it at its smallest form, but like thinking beyond
Mhm.
just the song itself and starting to think about, okay, well, what's it going to sound like as a full band? What's it going to sound like when I get drums in here? Like, how is it going to sound with, guitars? Like, what am I thinking for the bass line? Like, all that kind of shit that, like, I normally never would have thought of.
Right.
I normally would write a song with me and my guitar and be like, I did it. Like,
Yeah.
not, like, not even thinking.
You figure it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not how it's
Yeah.
done. Like, I mean, people can do it that way, and that's okay
Yeah.
if that's your vein. But for me, I don't want to step into a studio and spend 2 years developing 5
Right.
songs.
Right.
I want to step into a studio
Yeah.
for 2 days and get that shit done and then get it out to people. Like,
Right.
and I think that I feel like that's kind of like what I gleaned the most from in this experience is now I think I've written 30 songs in this pandemic, and now I'm like, cool, let's pick some.
Yeah. Well, and so the word that comes to mind for me is intention, is that like now you're writing with intention.
Yeah.
And for me, like that's a different level of like creativity. And I think that for so many artists or creatives, like we want to idolize um creativity as being this thing as being inspired. Like, well, I have to be inspired to create. And I was picking up my phone because I have a quote that's on my like profile page, and it says inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work.
Woo!
And the reason why I love that is that it doesn't demean creativity. What it promotes is intentional creativity in the sense that like you can't sit around waiting to be inspired to do something great.
Yep.
Like it's a craft.
Yes.
And creativity isn't a thing to be held on, to be precious, that waiting around for something magical to happen. And I feel like that's what we've like idealized this thing to be,
Yes.
instead of it being a thing that says, no, it's something I work at. It's something that I show up and I do and I execute and I do it with intention. And like for me, like there's so much more skill in the creative who can do it with intention than there is by the person who just responds out of inspiration.
Totally 100%. I think of the words that I feel like changed my perspective were strategic aggressiveness and trying to think like that strategic aggressiveness is something that like really weighed on me for a while, just trying to think about, okay, well, how am I going to pinpoint areas that I need to be aggressive in that have the most return and that will give legs to my creativity and my inspiration.
Mhm.
Like, to me, talent doesn't take you far. Like everybody has, and so many people rely on it, and I understand that, and I think in some ways, like we've worshipped that kind of idea that like talent is all that you need. Talent is the minimum thing that you need. There are so many talented people out there, and the reason why they're not all successful is because that's not what you need to be successful.
Right.
And so I think that once you get past the point of just relying on talent and you start thinking, okay, I've got this thing, how can I expand upon it? That's when like real shit starts to happen. And that's what separates the men from the boys. Like
100.
how
100%.
to be like that, you know?
Yeah. What's funny is so I talk about this. So, I mean, if anyone who's had conversations with me in terms of my philosophy on like even being a drummer and stuff like that, I always say this, and uh, it's funny you bring that up about like the whole thing with talent. Is that like as a drummer, I am the first to acknowledge that as far as talent goes, I am oftentimes the lesser qualified.
Always say that.
I do. And I don't say that with anything other than just being honest, in the sense that, like, I'm not the most talented drummer. When I'm in a room of drummers, I acknowledge that I am not the most talented, and I am often probably not in the upper talented realm of drummers, because I don't take drumming seriously as a drummer in that sense, to be like, let me be the best I can be at this thing. Because drumming was never for me a thing about being a drummer. Drumming was the avenue at which I got to create music. And I didn't, because of that, I didn't find myself being drawn to like crazy drummers, or like the drummers that every drummer is going to recite in their head right now and how they idolize them. Like, I don't give a shit. I just don't. And for it just was not my mentality. And I didn't sit in my bedroom and play along to all of these iconic songs. And I didn't sit and learn paradiddles for, 4 hours a day so I could be the fastest and have all these things down.
Yeah.
I started playing drums is because drums moved me, and it was all based out of some like a feeling of some sort.
Yeah.
And for me, like the thing that I always joke about what's kept me employed the most was my lack of skill. It's laugh, but I'm serious. I say this shit. I guarantee you right now. If there's anyone's listening right now, they're like, I've heard him say this.
I'm sure.
Because, and here's why I say this, is that someone who has spent the time to develop that skill set has committed to doing those things. They have all these tools in their bag, and all these tools, and they want to be used. Those tools want to be used, and there's nothing that we can do except for fight our ego.
Yep.
The best thing about not having a tool belt that has a lot of fucking tools is that as I don't have all these tools to pull from. I go, this is a job. I have 3 tools to use.
Yep.
I'm going to use those 3 tools. I'm going to make it work. And and for me, what it was is that I didn't approach it with being like, how can I come up with like this cool part, or how can I do this thing that's going to like stand out? Is that for me, more often than not, I just didn't want to fuck up. Like, that was my goal for most things, was like, not only do I not want to stand out, I just want to fuck up. So like, if I'm not even noticed, like, that's where I'm happiest. Because for me, if I'm not noticed, then what's happening is that I've slid into being part of something bigger, which
Yeah.
is the music itself. I don't give a fuck if you, like, I'm not looking for people to come up afterwards and be like, oh my God, that was the dopest fucking drum part. Oh, that fill you did.
But it does happen.
But it's just, I don't like that. The biggest things is when like the biggest compliments come up. And I remember specifically like playing with Trevor Mulvey, like there's times where people come up and they'd be musicians, because mostly it's gonna be musicians that recognize this. And they're like, dude, you and the bass player were so locked in.
Yes.
And they're like, it was just, and for me, that's the biggest compliment.
Yes.
And the thing that's another compliment is for people who I hear talking to other people or whatever, and they're referring to things that were going on that they don't realize that were the product of me and the bass player, say, being locked in. To them, it was just the reaction of that. And that feeds me way more than someone being like, oh, that roll you did was so cool. It like totally, like, I just don't.
Because you serve the song. That's the difference. And I think that that's especially one of the things that kind of blew my mind a little bit the most, I think, was when we started this whole process, is that I feel like that's where I took it from you, was like, serve the song. Like, you're not serving yourself, you're not serving your ideas, you're serving the song. It's so different to like pay your dues to a song. But one of the things I loved when I was young and I was like in choir, like we would always be told it's not about hearing each individual part, it's about one sound.
Mhm.
And I think that that's kind of how you play, is to one sound. And it's not that there's not like other parts and stuff like that, but it's about creating a product that when it's shown up front, it's one thing.
Yeah.
It's not like 4 different things that you're handing over to somebody else.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
like
and that's for me, like when I look at stuff, like, don't get me wrong, I'm still a musician and I still have appreciation for those things. And like when I show up and I see a band who has a drummer who just kills it, and as long as because the way I look at it too is that you could show up and watch a band play, and you could watch someone who fucks up and that stands out. And then to me, you can have someone who's like shredding and that stands out. And to me, they stand out the same.
Wow.
And so my favorite thing is when I see musicians who know how to do those things and still slide unnoticed except for to those who are paying attention.
Mm.
And like that's my favorite shit is to be like, like how often, my wife loves live music and stuff too. And so we go, that's like for us, we'd always go to concerts and like that would be my biggest things like, oh, like the drummer's doing this, he's doing this thing that like it's super crazy, but he's doing it because it fits what's happening everywhere else. And to me, that's just so much greater than some fucked up drum solo that just sounds like beating pots and pans. That's and sorry.
You all just got put on notice.
Well, I don't. But like I said, going back to that though, is all comes down to the fact that like the blessing it is that I consider it a blessing. I once looked down on what I do because I know where I lacked, but I consider it a blessing now almost that like I don't have to fight myself on having to do less because I
Yeah.
just don't have it.
But I also
Like
think
I don't have to go and like I don't have to rein it in because I don't
totally.
have the thing that's going over. Like I just don't.
Yes.
And so there was a time that where I went like, "Oh man, it'll be really good." But you know what I stopped doing? I stopped allowing myself to get booked for things where I felt like I was not doing the part. Like so in terms of like someone would say, "Hey, I need a drummer for this gig," and I would go do these gigs and I would constantly feel like, "Man, I'm like not really I don't have the skill set to really be doing this thing."
I can't even
And
imagine
then well, there's all kinds of
what
stuff
that
that's
even
just not
is.
comfortable for me, and that's not like it's not where it sits comfortably,
Yeah.
and it's not where I really excel. But like for me, unfortunately, like things like I love country music,
Mhm.
and the best thing about country music is it's like 2 and 4. Like I could sit meat and potatoes 2 and 4 all day long. We can go every song. We can go 12 songs straight. I don't give a shit. Just like boom, back, boom. Don't care. Let's go. Or like train beat. You want a train beat?
I
I remember when
love
I first
it.
started playing and like at like the church and it'd be
Yeah.
one of those things and they'd be like, "Hey, can you do like the train beat thing?" And it'd be like 4 on the floor with a train beat and I would be miserable because I'd be like, "I want to do something like, oh my God." If someone's like, "Hey, oh, this one's gonna be a train beat," I light up. Cause I'm like, I could sit here like that all day and just it'll feel good and I don't have to think about it. Like that's my shit. I get high off of it.
Yeah.
Like, let's go.
Yeah.
And that's just one of those where I don't know. So I just learned where I fit.
Mhm.
And fortunately, where I fit is also in an area that I love. So
Oh,
for me, it was like, this is all great. So when people come through and I get people that hit me up and they say, hey, I'm looking for a drummer to do this thing on this record. And I'm like, hey, I got like 7 people that'll kill that. I ain't your guy. I'm just not.
that's amazing.
Because I know you're gonna want some like crazy prog rock, like syncopated, fucking paradiddles all over the place and shit, and like,
Diddles, is that a word?
yeah, it's a word. I only know the word. I barely know the function.
I've never heard
But
that.
for real, but it's just one of those where I don't know, self-awareness. I learned
Yeah.
that, and it's not talking down. I'm not talking down on myself in it.
You're
I'm just
playing to
saying
your
that.
strengths.
Going back to what you said of
Yeah.
like, of it's just really a matter of like, skill is great. Skill is fabulous. I watch every now and then YouTube drummers
Yeah.
that shred
Yeah.
and they're doing all this crazy shit. And it doesn't really something that like satisfies me, but I do like to see it from time to time. But it's also one of those things where I go, that motherfucker ain't playing with nobody. There's a reason why he's
Yeah.
still in his bedroom playing by himself. And I don't play fucking drums to play by myself.
Oh.
Like I do it to go play as a unit with other people.
Yes. I
And
also think that you're strong in your lane. And I think that if more creatives can learn to be strong in their lane, they'll be more successful.
yeah, I mean that's just a just an element of just success in general, whether it's,
yes,
I mean, in business, like
across the board.
Gary Vaynerchuk, someone who's inspired me over the years through business and, as an entrepreneur. And he's one of those where he's like, dude, things that I suck at, I just don't even bother.
Smart.
I double down on all my strengths.
Yes.
Like, this is what I'm good at. All my chips. I go all
Yes.
in on the shit I'm good at. The shit I suck at, someone else will do it.
And I think that's so wise, though. I think too many people try so hard to like expand in other areas. I remember when I was trying to figure out like where I fit as a vocalist in music, and I would try everything. I mean, I was like, I'm an R&B singer this week, and the next week it was like I'm a jazz singer, and the next week it was like I'm doing country. And then it just kind of moved from like thing to thing, and then
Yeah.
it took so long for me to be like, yeah, I can do all that stuff, but like where do I feel is like my own? And so like playing to your strengths is like such an important thing for success
Yeah. Just,
everywhere.
everywhere and everything that you do. And that's not to say that you neglect, like, there's some things that, like, oh, you suck at this, you should probably be better.
Yeah.
And like those things do exist,
Yes.
unless you can afford to hire someone to do it. And I don't like, and that's the only time that doesn't really fucking matter. But but more often than not, doubling down on your strengths is where you're going to find the freedom to be free from having to kind of endure the things that are your biggest weaknesses, and
Uh-huh.
like, and like going back to like even with myself in terms of drumming, like, I, when I doubled down and realizing the things that like, this is what I do well. And then I said yes to those things. It didn't allow me to have time to even think about doing the things that aren't in my lane.
Yeah.
Like when I don't have anything going on, like, yeah, I want to say yes to anything that comes up, whether it's in my lane or not. But when I have a schedule that's full of things that are like, this is what I want, this is in my lane, well, then the other things get a no. No, that's not either. It's I don't do that well, or it's I don't like that,
Yeah.
or I don't want to.
Yeah.
And because I have the freedom from it, because I have the things that are here. And we talked about that even in on a business side of like scheduling as an artist, like that.
Yeah.
Like I'm a huge believer in people who are trying to navigate their way through what they should or shouldn't be doing. And I'm an advocate of, until you have a full calendar, you haven't created a market for shit.
Yep.
And so you can't pick and choose. Say yes till your calendar's full. When your calendar's full, now you get to choose.
Ah.
And and I like we went through that.
You told me
Because
like
you'd be like, I don't like, I don't want to do this one. Like they're not like, whatever. And I'm like, you're saying yes.
He did. He said it. He said it. But it was so smart. I needed to hear that. And it's not because I was like, I'm better than anything. That's not how I felt.
No.
It was just I knew what I wanted to do.
Right.
But you kept reminding me that it's so important to keep saying yes to things until your schedule is so backed up and crazy. Do you get to say no to anything? So I literally would say yes to everything. To everything. I'd be like, yeah.
Well, and the best part, because it'd be like, well, this one's not really paying that much, whatever. And but now it's like, so what's happened over the period of time is you've gone and you went through a period of saying yes.
Yep.
And you had a schedule that was full of a lot of yeses, whether you like those things or not. And then over time, what happens is now when something better comes down, well, the thing that I didn't like doing is gone.
Yeah.
It gets replaced with something else.
Yeah.
And that's like, I feel like people think economics applies strictly to like money.
Mm.
And what people fail to understand is that the economy of time
And
is
energy.
far,
Yep.
far more valuable than money.
Great. Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Agreed.
Like time is my biggest fucking asset.
Yes.
Like money, I don't have a lot and I don't care for it, but my time is everything. And I say yes to a lot.
Yes,
So which
you
means
do.
my time's even more limited.
Yeah.
So it's one of those where like that's the thing I had to learn, like the power of saying no, but the power of saying no only had power because of the fact that I had all this
You were
other
booked
shit
up
that was
everywhere
like,
else. Truth.
it's like it wasn't this thing of where I'm not doing anything and the thing comes along. Like, how much power do I have to negotiate, or how much power do I have to bullshit when I'm sitting there and I don't really have anything going on?
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, I want to do this thing." Be like, well, I can't even like use the like fucked up excuse. Be like, well, I'm too busy. I can't. Which is my favorite fucking excuse to have in my back pocket. So I can't even do that because it's like, they're like, bitch, you ain't busy.
Tell it.
So for no other reason.
Tell it. I love it.
I'm just saying.
It's true though.
Yeah.
And I think too, like, you start getting used to like saying yes to everything that then you're like, I feel now I'm always torn because I'm like, well, two people want music from me on the same day. How can I fit them both on the same day?
That's great.
Like now I'm like, okay, I don't want to say no because I don't want to turn something down
Right.
because to me, momentum is the most precious thing in the world. Like I prefer momentum over money. Like if I'm continually moving and continually making moves and just going, I don't want to stop for anything. And so if I get like hit up by two people, they're like, hey, for example, December 5th, what are you doing? I had 3 people reach out to me for that day, and I was like, can I do
How
all
do I
3?
make them all?
Literally,
Yeah.
not joking, 100%.
Hey, you did that. I hit you up the other day
Yes.
about something, about like a private thing.
I'll do it.
And you're like, well, can they do it then? Like,
Yeah.
I'll do it. I'll come before.
I'll do it.
Yeah.
I will. And especially, and I think that like that's where I like try to turn the pandemic from like a shitty thing to like a perspective thing for
Yeah.
me is like, okay, now I understand that these moments are far few between. Like, how can I now make time for everything that I possibly can?
Yeah.
And I love it.
Well, and that's what like I'm fascinated by because, and I was talking to someone about this the other day. I made the comment. I was like, there's motherfuckers out here sitting on their hands. Hollander's over here turning shit down.
Yes. Damn it.
And
I
I'm
wish I
like-
wasn't.
I was like, she turns down more stuff than some of these people are doing at all. And like, it's one of those things where like, I'm not hating on people. If you're
That's your thing.
if you're wanting to camp out and do your thing and you're like, and you're, oh, here, let me finish that for you. She's trying to get me drunk. But like if you're sitting there and you're like, hey, I don't want to be out doing this or that, and I don't want to, that's great. That's absolutely fine. My issue lies in when I constantly hear people who are complaining about it.
Yes. That's the
I don't
difference.
care if you choose to do nothing. What I care about and I get super irritated about is when people begin complaining
Mhm.
and you're like, what have you done? Like, you haven't done anything. Like, you're not doing anything. And so I don't know what it is that I'm not sure if it's a thing of just people feel like, hey, well, I should just be given these things, or I should be given this opportunity, or these people should be hitting me up, or I should be booked at this thing because of whatever. And I don't know. I think for me, and my perspective is in the core essence of like what is kind of like a true capitalist mentality, in the sense that like the market dictates everything and value, which is why what we just talked about. Like,
Yes.
the more that you're doing, the more value you are adding.
Yes.
And there's supply and demand, and people want things that are more valuable. And so when you're sitting on your hands at home and you haven't done anything, you're not relevant, and your value is not as great.
Yep.
That's just economics of time.
Yep.
And everything that's going on. Like, there's not a lot of opportunities.
Unfortunately.
There's not as many opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities.
There are a lot. There really, really are.
Yeah.
And you make your own sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's.
Well, and going back to like, I remember very distinctly, and I remember it clicked for you. I remember seeing it in your face because you said something about, you're like, there's a gig you had and you were kind of complaining about it because of some variable that's involved. And I said, that's fine. I was like, you could not do it. There's probably 20 motherfuckers waiting in line to get it.
Yeah.
And you were like, all of a sudden you were like,
I was
well,
like,
I don't want that bitch to have my shit.
I was like, oh
Yeah.
shit. That's exactly what happened. But it did. It put things in perspective. And you said to me, and there's like this fine line between fighting for your worth, but also working with people.
Developing your worth?
Developing. Yes. That's a much better way to put it. So fighting for your worth and developing it. There's a fine line between that. And I think that as a musician, I'm constantly battled between that, because to me, at the end of the day, it makes more sense for me to show up than it does for me to not. And so finding that balance of like where that lies, I think is like tough. But you said to me, you were like, well, you could be making $100 at this show, or you could make nothing and you can sit on your couch. And I was like,
and someone else is going to make the
yeah,
$100.
and somebody else. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to bulldoze everyone, right? I'm trying to go.
Right.
And so like it's such a balance of like figuring that out for yourself, and everyone else, like everyone has their minimums and stuff like that. And I'm not taking away from that. For me though, like I just want to go.
Yeah.
And so right now I feel like my perspective has completely transitioned from this is what I want to this is what I want, but it's more important for me to stay busy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And especially now.
That's the economy of time.
Yeah.
It's really just about like your time. And I mean, like all things that are driven in an economy, like, their values change at times.
Yes.
Like it varies.
Yes.
Like my time now the value on my time is different than it was 8 months ago. The value on my time next week is going to be different than the value on my time today. And it all depends on everything that's going on. And I feel like people like to pretend that like they live in a fixed rate life where like their time is like, well, this is it. And you go, okay, that's fine. But the market is going to go by you.
Yes.
And the people who are living in the market are going to flow with it.
And also to add to that, like, because we're in a pandemic, things are different. Like, and I get frustrated when I hear about people where they're like, well, this is normally my minimum. And I'm like, fuck your minimums. Like, sorry, but fuck your minimums, because right now.
And you're normal.
And you're normal. Yes.
Yeah.
Because everybody's struggling. During the shutdown, I can't tell you, I've done a handful of free shows. And I normally would never do a free show because I think, like you, time is money. And so for me, like my time is valuable, but we have to keep in perspective that it is a shutdown right now. Businesses are hurting. It is such a little tiny sacrifice for me to show up and provide music where I can to help support the places that have been supporting me throughout my entire music career and just can't right now. And so I think it's important for musicians and businesses to kind of like give and take, like find out ways where we can collaborate, what we can do to help like serve one another in these times, because we're all fucking hurting. It's not just one person, like everybody's going through it.
Yep.
And so I think right now, especially, like I don't have minimums. I don't have, I'm not really, there's not a lot that I'll say no to right now.
Just whether or not it fits in your schedule.
Yeah. And I like to see my calendar booked up more than.
Well, that's what I love.
not.
So, doing the booking over at 1924.
Hell yeah. Shout out to 1924. We love you.
I do love that place.
Yeah, we do.
If you haven't been out there, it's in Fallbrook. Great vineyard.
It's the best.
Everyone out there is great. It's like
We're
a
obsessed.
breath of fresh air out there.
That sangria.
Yeah.
The bottom of the keg.
Oof.
Ooh.
Ooh.
So good.
So good. But I know that this is funny. So I do doing all the booking there. Like, obviously I hit you up and you're like, hey, I want to book. Like, I need to book like a little further out. Like, and I'm
sorry, not sorry.
But it's just kind of funny because it's like I have so many people who are like, hit me up and they're trying to get booked for like, hey, I know there's music going on. Like, is there an opening next week?
Wait, what?
Yeah. And
Are
they're
they
like,
really for like
yeah,
a week
yeah.
in advance?
Yeah. And they'll be like, oh, are there any openings next week on the music stuff? And I'm like, I got people that I work with that are like booking like months in advance. Like, it's a trip. It's like one of those, and it's just a different, like, again, it's the difference between people who are out there. And so, point being that, like, you're like, hey, I need to book, like, if this is what we're doing, like, I need to book 2 months out.
Well, and I also feel like that's where I'm selfish because like I want to book the places that I love the most.
Yeah.
I don't want to go a month without seeing you. Okay. All right. That's how I feel. So I will have to book out like in advance and I mean, unfortunately, right now, I mean, not unfortunately, absolutely fortunately, right now, I'm booking out 2 months in advance.
Yeah.
Like, so I always get shocked when I get people and they're like, hey, are you available next month? And I'm like, what? A
Yeah.
month? I'm like, that is not nearly enough time. And it's not because I'm like a stuck up bitch. It's because like I literally try to pack my schedule as
Right.
much as possible, like to the brim almost, to the brim for at least 2 months in advance because I'm not thinking about this weekend. I'm thinking about 2 months from now to make sure that I'm still hustling this hard.
Right.
I can't believe people are reaching out a week in advance.
Oh, yeah. I get all kinds of weird
You have
stuff.
anything tomorrow?
Yeah. Yeah.
Get it together.
I
If you're
know.
serious about this,
It's-
get it together. Oh my God.
Yeah. It's fun stuff.
I do feel bad because I think that the emails that you get on a constant basis are pretty intense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm tempted because I have my computer right here to be like, oh, let me pull up emails. I'm not going to do that, but
Oh, do
it's
it.
one of those things
No,
where it's
do
so
it.
funny. Like
You
I
won't do it.
get hit up by people for stuff, and it's like, and they'll be like, oh, hey, I wanted to see, like, I want to play this place on this date, and I'll be like, yo, I'm booked like 2 months out, and they're like, what? And they're like, well,
Shocked?
yeah, and they'll like start like trying to be like, well, I see that you're like, I'm like, you're trying to rationalize right now why like I shouldn't be booked that day so you can come in and like we are off on such a bad foot right now. And like you think this is gonna go somewhere?
I just can't imagine if you're that difficult to schedule, how difficult you must be to
Oh yeah.
work with.
Oh, it's the best. And then they'll fall. So at the end of me trying to explain to them how like, I don't know, reality works. And then they'll come in and they'll be like, oh, okay, well, if anything opens up, please let me know. And I'm like,
Not
oh,
after
delete. Yeah, I'm like,
that.
I'll totally hit you up.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's just, and it's like, I don't want to be an asshole.
No,
But
you
it's
have
just,
to be.
it's just
Do
one of those
it.
things
Be
where
one.
it's just like
No,
it's just an
be one.
interesting, it's an interesting time that we're living in, and we're living in a weird place culturally that like promotes this idea of like, oh, if I feel this way, it must be. And
Sheer entitlement.
yeah, and it is interesting because, and it's like, it's just funny that like the lengths that people will go to um navigate that, in terms of just like, oh, well, like, well, I live right down the street, so like, oh, you live right down the street, therefore you are the most qualified to be hired for this musical gig.
Must be freaking nice. I've
Which,
traveled, but
don't-
I'm like, but that's not a qualification.
oh, don't get me wrong, I wish I lived down the street because that way I can get pissed fucking drunk and walk home.
Exactly.
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 But that doesn't make you the most qualified to be like, oh, like I should just be hired for this thing.
I get hella annoyed that people have forgotten how to like fight for stuff
Yeah.
properly. Like it frustrates me that people think that, oh, just because I have a conversation or just because I show up and I talk to the bartender that I should have a show.
Right.
Like it's not about that. You got to
Yeah.
put your time in and you have to be dedicated and humble enough to be able to be like, this is my time. This
Mhm.
is the time that I'm putting in so that a year from now, I can look back and be like, I hustled hard for this.
Yeah.
But nobody wants to do that anymore.
No, they don't.
I feel I do think your emails are like so tough.
It's
So
funny.
tough.
It's great. I mean, well, honestly, it's like one of those things too where, you know, if you're listening, I'm sorry, and you've emailed me, I'm sorry, but like I usually, if it's something that's like that, I'll be like, I'm not just not gonna not respond.
But also if you have emailed him and maybe you fall into this category, like use this as a moment to just learn a little bit. And I say that
Yeah,
with like respect. I'm
yeah,
not saying that to like be an asshole. I'm saying that because I had to get myself checked more than once or twice to be able to like get to a place where my calendar's booked. Like
yeah,
it took time and I'm sure I'll get checked even more with what lies ahead. But use these things as like teachable moments to figure out, okay, like this is what I should do. This is how I should go about booking something. Everything's a teachable moment.
yeah. Well, yeah. And it's like one of those where, yeah, I was talking to someone about it the other day. So like I had a situation where I filled a day with someone who was like a new artist and I don't know them. I've never even met them. And unfortunately I booked them for a thing and I couldn't even be there to meet them then either. Um, and someone had asked me, they're like, "Well, how do you navigate that? Like booking someone you don't even know?" And I said, "Well, what happens is I get flooded with emails from people, and honestly, the way that you email me is going to be a huge sign in the type of person that you are."
Yep.
And going back to when we talk about like the difference between people who are really skilled and those who understand all the other variables and who often are the ones who get hired, like I don't care how great you are. I need to know that you're going to show up on time. You're
Yep.
going to show up with all the stuff. You're going to fit the space. You're going to understand the dynamic. You're going to be flexible. You're going to be all the things that you need to be. And the way that I can discern that is in the way you interact with me when you reach out to me in an
Yes.
email, which sounds crazy to say that,
But it
like,
does though.
well, it's like, oh, like, well, I'm judging this person based on their email. But let me explain.
Break it down for us,
Let me
Dolly.
break it
Break
down.
it down. Break it down.
So you get someone who goes and I get an email and it says, "Hey, I got your information from such and such and such and such. I want to play this thing." That's it. Then I get emails from other people who are like, "Hey, my name is so and so. I got your information from this place, whatever, from this person, and I'm interested in playing this place that you book. And here's what I do: I can play through up to 3 hours of music, and then I can do covers and originals. You let me know what is better for the place. Like I can
Yes.
play around the circumstance. I have my own equipment. Here's all my links. Here's my Instagram. Here's my Facebook.
Yep.
Here's links to all my music, blah 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 whatever. I don't know. Who do you think I'm gonna fucking pay attention to?
Exactly.
Like,
Because you
so
don't have to
someone
do any research. It's
no,
all
someone's
already
gonna
there
reach
for
out and I'm
you.
gonna so what? I'm gonna have to email you and
Yep.
go to the person who said, "Hey, I want to play here." Do you think I'm gonna go, "Hey, okay,
What do you play?
well, what's your name? What do you do? Can you do X, Y?" When I have somebody else who
Just
said,
already
boom,
bringing
all the
that to you.
information I need, all I have to do is say, "Hey, are you available this day? Do you want to do it?" And here's what it pays. And they go, "Yep." I go,
L.
"Cool.
Yes.
Show up. Be there at this time. This
Artists.
is what it is." And they go. And at that point in time, the amount of care I have on their talent set is zero.
Well, and the reason why is because they've already put enough effort into showing you their work ethic.
I trust at that point in time,
Yes.
if they articulate themselves in the way that they do, that they have enough talent to cover the
Yes.
spread.
I would say 90% of the time.
Yeah.
Maybe even 95% of the time
Yeah.
that you'll be fine. But artists, did you just hear that? Following that kind of protocol in your emails is gold.
I'm baffled. I'm telling you right now. So like I've been in lots of different bands, and for most of them, I've been the person to be like, let me take over the like contact
You
stuff.
have. You
But it's
have.
because I've been baffled on the sense of, like, you go and you look at, I'm like, that's the, like, That's the email you sent to these motherfuckers? Like, we're trying to get booked for this thing, and like that's what you said?
That like it makes me nervous.
It's like I feel like people just don't understand that. So again, it goes back to like we talk about the difference between ideas and reality. Like, oh, I want to do this thing. The idea of playing that thing's great. I should do that thing. And your paradigm is focused on you and not focused on the reality of like, oh, okay, well, what's going to take for me to play there? Somebody
Yep.
has to do all the groundwork to
Yep.
make that thing happen. Oh, I want to play this festival. Somebody's booking that festival. Somebody's putting together a catalog of artists. And while you might be the best fucking band that has ever walked the earth, if you don't make my life easier or like at least help me along the path,
Yes.
like, why do I care? Because my job is to execute my job. My job isn't to
Yes.
care
It's
about.
also do research
Yeah.
to figure out if people are capable. And I think that like when I was trying to figure out where I could book, how I could book, all that kind of stuff, like there was a time where I only had an hour worth of material. And I was like, I only have an hour. Like, and I remember reaching out to people and they're like, that's fine. Like, and at that time, I didn't charge for anything
Mhm.
because I was like, I'm just starting out. I'm not going to charge for anything. I'm just going to show up and I'm going to like try my best. And I knew enough, but I didn't know much. And then I started to see that most places were like, oh, well, like our artists, we require them to play for 2 to 3 hours because that's what makes it most beneficial for these
Right.
places of business. And I'm there to add to the atmosphere. I'm not there to make it about me. Like, unfortunately, this is not like a music hall where I'm playing like where the shit that I
Right.
want to play. Like, I'm paid to add to the environment that's already in place. And it's my job to do my homework to figure out how I can do that. And after that, I was like, okay, I've got to come up with like 3 hours of material, and it took a long time. And I remember specifically like griping to you, like 3 hours is so long. And now I'm like, 3 hours is not enough time. Like I have so much I want to
It's true.
share.
And sometimes it's funny is you totally say that you get to like the end of one of your like longer sets or something like that, and I'm like, you didn't play this song.
flew
You
by.
didn't play that
Yes,
song.
I
You didn't play
know.
this song. And I'm
I
like, this
know.
is bullshit. I want my fucking money back.
And if he's had enough to drink, he will call me
Oh,
out on
I
the
will
spot.
start. It'll be like the last like 12 minutes, and I'll just start. I'm like,
12.
she hasn't.
It'll be the last like 2. It'll be like the last 2 minutes.
Well,
and
I
you're
just
like,
know.
you haven't done this.
Yeah, if you haven't got to like the ones I want, I'll be like, she hasn't done them. Oh, we'll see about that.
And I do. I try to push the envelope with you and be like, I'm not going to play this one today and see. Because I don't want to like play all the good ones all the time. I'm trying.
Give the people what they want.
I got to make him come back for more. I can't give all the good all the time.
They come back for good.
That's true. I'm still learning, you guys. I'm still learning.
Oh,
Out of control.
yeah. That's crazy. I had a thought. So something that I you know what's funny? So I wanted to have like notepads here. So that way if like something happened, we could like write it down to like
I know,
think
because
of
there were a lot of
mental
things
note.
you
Hey,
said.
I'm learning on the fly. This is episode 1. I haven't really like, I don't have this figured out. Probably never have it fully figured out, and that's the goal. My goal is to never have it figured out. That's how I want to feel. But I did make a mental note. And I had a thought. We were talking, something came up about church. So I remember we both come from church background.
Yeah.
And I am such a huge like proponent of the reality that, or at least just accepting that how many people have come from that environment.
A lot of people.
And I very distinctly remember, I have one of those fucked up like photograph. It's not photographic, but like when it comes to like moments, I can just remember a lot of variables. I can remember like details of like things. Like I can put myself in that. And I remember the first time, I don't think we met, but it was the first time that I ever like encountered you. And you were singing for a choir while at Grace Chapel of the Coast when I was there.
All of Grace Chapel.
And I remember there's this choir that was there, and all of a sudden, this little girl comes out of nowhere with the biggest fucking voice ever. And I remember very distinctly, like, there's these, so this church is in an old movie theater. And so it had these old school chairs from like a movie theater from like the mid 90s, essentially.
Mhm.
I hope they've got new chairs since then.
I hope they haven't. That's
They were the
tight.
squeakiest, gnarliest chairs ever. They're like metal backed chairs with like a little bit of padding that are
Polyester
all
fabric.
like, oh yeah, they were so
dig
gnarly.
it.
And but I very distinctly remember you came out, and I wish I could remember the song, because I actually have somewhere
I know the song.
the recording of that live thing. I remember I had it.
I know that day.
And I remember you came out and had like a solo thing, and I remember like white knuckling the chair in front of me, because it was just one of those things. It was like, your voice was so ginormous. It was unlike anything I had in my life at that moment in time had experienced in person.
Aw.
And I remember just being like, granted, I was at church, so I probably wasn't thinking this vulgarly, but I was like, what the actual fuck is happening? So whatever the variation of that in like a church setting, that's how I felt.
I remember that day.
So gnarly.
We were so a little backstory to that is all throughout high school and even in my junior high days, because my principal, who was also like my teacher and my choir instructor, he pulled me from like
Just, typical Christian
everything.
school, like
I
a
went to,
alternate,
like,
what do you
yes,
do?
everything.
I'm a gym teacher, the principal, and I do counseling.
Yeah, everything, literally. But he pulled me from like the 5th grade to be in our high school choir ensemble. So here I am in like 5th grade, like in a freaking trainer bra, like learning Latin music.
Trainer bra.
Like learning how to like sing Latin music and like French. We even sang a song in like German once, which German is not, like,
That's an aggressive ass
it
language.
is an aggressive language, and to figure out how to sing that and sound pretty is fucking tough. So anyways, so I remember him pulling me like the 5th grade, and I started just like singing these songs, and like by the 7th grade we had like traveled the world, and every year we'd go on some sort of like big trip. And before that trip, we'd always go to Pasadena to do like a competition where we'd like perform these songs and compete against like other schools like ours and compete. And one of the songs was this song called Lead Me to the Rock.
That's what it was.
And it was every time before we would go compete, we'd go around performing at other churches in our area to kind of like get an idea of how it feels to perform. And I remember that day, and this was, I think it was my senior year. I think so. And I remember that song was like one of my solos that year. And I had rewritten the vocal part, which you don't do. Like normally when you get classical pieces, you learn it exactly how it is and you sing it exactly how it is. But because of how stubborn I am, I was like, that's not good. Let's do this.
Weird.
And so weird. Not like me at all. So I rewrote it and we played it. And I remember that was like, I think the first time we'd ever performed it was at Grace Chapel. And it was like were there 2 services, I think?
There could have been.
First service,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I like messed it up somehow, and then like second service, I feel like I got it together.
Yeah, I think I was there for the second service.
Or something.
Maybe. It was like a special.
Yeah.
It was like a special thing that was happening.
Yeah.
So they did like
Yeah. It was amazing. It was
Yeah.
so much fun. I carry a very special place in my heart for those days. But it totally taught me like performance and what
Yeah.
it means to like perform, and that's how I really got to like use my voice, because
Yeah.
all the girls I sang with were such like lighthearted,
tiny voice singers, and I
Yeah.
was like, I want to blow people out of their seats.
Yeah. Well, and so I kind of brought it up too, because like obviously that was the first time I had ever like I can't remember if I met you that day or not, but I definitely know that it was a memorable thing. And then it was interesting that later on, like everything transpired the way
Became
it did.
BFF. We're
But
making history.
but I brought that up because I've always been fascinated with like the role the church has had on the music community. My wife and I like with zero shame are huge fans of The Voice. And I know you talk shit all the time, but we love it. And I remember even when we first started dating and I was like, hey, new season of The Voice is coming on, and she was like, what the fuck? Like, you loser. Like, you're gonna watch The fucking Voice? Like, what is wrong with you?
She's tough as nails.
Oh
I
yeah,
love her.
gnarly. So she's sitting there probably with like fucking vodka on the rocks, and she's like, okay,
Yeah.
let's see what these idiots are all
Yep.
about.
Oh god,
Yeah,
I
and
love
so
her.
we're sitting there and we start watching The Voice, and she falls in love with it. And so we've watched The Voice every season since then. And but I remember early on what something that happened is watching The Voice, these people come on and they tell their backstories and everything, and a third of them would always have a backstory. Said, well, I grew up singing in the church, or I did this in the church. And she was very like naive to that world, was just like, what's up with all these people? Like, it seems like they all like come from the church. And it's one of those things where so many people that I do music with now are people who I've played with in the church. Stephen like one of my best friends and one of my favorite guitar players that I've played with, Wish in the Well, and we've played on all kinds of other stuff together. All this
Hell
stuff.
yeah.
Met him through the church.
Shout out to Steven, we love you.
Love Steven. Jonathan Hall, who's played with us on some of your stuff, started playing with him in the church.
Yeah, J Hall.
Like Mason, who played guitar on your
Mason.
records, started playing in the church.
Francis Bloom.
I started playing in church. You started doing it in church.
Yeah.
Francis Bloom's started in the church.
Yeah.
Like, so much of the musical world that I've lived in has been kind of through that dynamic, and explaining it to someone like my wife, who as a kid went through like the traditional church, like the Catholic Church, which was like a very like whatever, like super strict and very just like, and that's not the world I grew up in, playing where we were doing crazy music in the church.
Hell yeah.
We were stirring shit up.
Yeah, starting conga lines.
Conga line. Sometimes.
Yep.
Grace Chapel of the Coast.
Yep.
100% had conga lines.
100%.
Those fools got down with all of it. Like,
all of it. I loved it.
But, and like for me, like that's how, like, that's not why I play music, but it's definitely the avenue that led me to having the opportunity to play music, in the sense that, my dad bought me a drum set when I was like late in high school. And like, I was always been drawn to playing drums. I just never really had the avenue to do it. And then for whatever reason, I don't know why my dad bought me a drum set. He just did. And it all kind of connected there. And I knew that I wanted to play drums. And I have a story that's involved with that too, that involves X. And like, that kind of basically was like my, like, whatever, not relevant to this story. But but what happened is, so I'd have surf PE, and when it would be raining, the surf PE coach was also the band teacher or whatever. So when it would rain, we get rained out and we couldn't have surf PE, we'd have to go hang out in his classroom, and it'd be the band room. And one day he's like, oh, does anyone want to like, and I'd got a drum set. So I was like, oh, I'll kind of like tinker. And so like he had taught me like the super basics of like playing drums. And then at the time I was going to like 3 different youth groups a week. Remember earlier how I noted how when I do shit, I do it like all in, and I do like way too much. So I was in high school going to 3 different, maybe at sometimes 4 different youth groups outside of going to church on Sundays, which, by the way, I didn't even grow up in a church household. My dad didn't even like the church, and I was still going to 3 to 4, sometimes 5 different
You're
church functions.
so blessed.
I'm so
blessed.
special.
You're so blessed.
But that's just the way I operate. But and I remember Willie, who's my youth pastor.
Yeah, Willie.
It was like I just was like kind of like practicing something the thing, and it was just the most basic 2 and 4. Remember when I said that I love also playing just 2 and 4?
Church
The
loves
first fucking
2 and
the
4.
first beat that I learned, whatever, is the beat that
I
I will
love
play
it.
today. Anyway, so I'm playing that, and he's like, for like the youth service thing, he's like, "Hey, do you want to like you should play with me tonight when I lead the youth group like worship service." And I'm like, "Dude, I don't know." He's like, "No, just do what you did, and then you just adjust the time based on like how fast I'm playing. Just play exactly what you played." And I'm like, "Okay." So I would just play the same thing, and then as he would play a slower song, I might slow down a little bit. I'm like, "Oh, okay, like I got it." Like, and so that's how like I learned to play. And so I did that for a little while. And then it kind of formulated like a high school youth group kind of band thing, and I was doing that. And then it turned into, now it was like, okay, well now the main service is going to have the high schoolers lead. So I did that. And then I was like, oh, okay, well you can. And so like over time, it just kind of developed in this thing of learning to play on the fly, and which turned into playing with like the main church service. And it would be like, oh, hey, well, cool. So you're going to play this thing. We're going to do a rehearsal. Here's the song. So you go listen to the songs, and then you show up. We'll do a rehearsal, and you're going to kind of play them in our adapted, limited version of this really eclectic, complicated fucking song.
The most complex stuff.
Yeah, they'd be like,
There's
well,
like 2 different drum lines. Pick one. Make them sound like you're playing both.
Yeah, it'd be like, oh, let's take this really complicated number and like let's take like the most semi-talented people, because that's just what we had, and like pretend that we're gonna like do this huge piece. Like, okay. So that was like constantly wrestling that. But it was a situation where like, where else would I have had the opportunity to just play in front of people, to say, hey, here's these songs we're gonna learn, figure it out, and then play. And then on top of that, playing with musicians who weren't quote unquote musicians. So we're playing live in front of people with people who don't really know what the fuck they're doing. And you're having to adapt. You're having to really pay attention to like
listening
playing
to each
together and learning. Not because that's what music's about, because your life depended on it. Because you didn't want to be the idiot who was still playing when everyone
all fall apart.
Yeah. And so like all those things I look back on were also like aspects that like really grew into, like when I go back on, earlier was saying, well, I didn't grow up playing in my bedroom by myself, where I grew up playing on stage in front of people.
Same.
Like that's what happened. And I look at like so many of the musicians that I do stuff with now, or so many musicians who are just out there in general, they all come from like super similar backgrounds.
Because where else are you going to be able to play like that? Like, where else are you going to be able to play with a band that loves the idea of music, that wants to spend the time to do it? Or not to spend the time, but to like give whatever time left they have to something. Like, there's nowhere else where they're like, let's get together and be a band and play these songs. There's nowhere else where that happens. But it happens all the time at church. And that's what drew me to that. The very first time I ever played with a band. Second time. The first time I ever played with a band was with the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band.
What?
I don't know if I told you that. Yeah. It was with the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band in Utah at a balloon festival. I did like 3 years in a row.
Balloon festival.
Before you try to throw shade, this thing was lit. It was out of control, like giant stages, like Coachella-sized stages at these balloon festivals, which to me didn't really make sense because it wasn't that packed. Like not enough for that.
Why is the stage so big?
It was like literally I was running around the entire stage and I was like, this doesn't need to be this big.
But I'm going to use it.
But I will use every last inch of this.
Weird.
Yes, I will.
Never would have guessed that.
But my second
Yeah.
time playing with a full band was at church. That
Yeah.
was like the second time I got to experience like, okay, like this is what it means to play with a band and how important it is for me to make sure that I listen to the drummer and his tempo, that I'm not creating my own. Like all that stuff like matters so much. And to be able to hear like this is how it sounded originally, but this is how we're gonna play it. Like
Yeah.
that kind of ability
Adapting.
to adapt.
Yeah.
That was so wild. But I don't think that there's a lot of arenas that allow for that now, unless you're like making your own band in your garage.
Yeah, but even that,
But
like,
you're not in front
what's
of
it take
people.
for you to like, like, so that's the other thing too. Like, before I ever played in a band outside of like the church, so like I had played on stages with thousands of people there to hear it before I ever played in like a traditional band by the sense.
Yep.
And it's one of those things where, when it came time and I was doing music with people in an actual band, like they had never experienced that. Like they didn't know what it was like to be up on stage in front of 5,000 people.
Yeah.
And honestly, a lot of the bands that I went to go on to go play with never would see 5,000 people.
It's true.
I mean, that's the other part is it's like
Yeah.
it's a definitely an interesting dynamic and world. But the other thing is the thing I love most about it is in that setting, the thing I learned is you really learn the power of where you lie in your instrument,
Yep.
and you learn the power that you have to move people, and you learn like what it means, because in that world that's everything. That's the only
Yes.
reason why you're doing what you're doing.
Yes.
You're not there to have a really cool song, you're there to move people.
Yep.
And so you learn, and it's a weird thing because like my perspective on it now is one that lends towards like there is a subtle manipulation that's involved.
Oh, 100%. I will agree with you.
Yeah.
100%. It makes us sound like crazy psychopaths, but it's about being able to feel something all
Mhm.
together collectively. I think that matters more than really your song, period.
Right.
And
Well, and I, the reason why I say manipulation too is in the sense that when you're in a room full of 2,000 people, and you know I know that this song is going to have a moment that's going to go really big, and then it's going to drastically die, and then I'm going to do a quarter note kick drum build, and we're going to do this crazy build, and I know from past experience and all the things involved, I know what this is going to stir up in 2,000 people who are watching, who are there with the intention to be like satisfied in that way, who are there to feel something. And which is why I say, like, again, I use the word manipulation lightly in the sense that, like, yes, especially as a drummer, I will say this too. I did learn in my role there that, like, there might be a band leader, but at the end of the day, the drummer is the one that was
100%.
because if I felt so led in that moment to say, we're going to build this thing back up.
Yep.
I just go.
And you did.
What are you going to do? You're going to leave me by myself?
You did.
Oh.
I remember so many times when we would play at Grace, and there would be times where I would be like, okay, this song is done. And then I would hear you just
Nope.
be like, nope,
Yeah.
we're going back in, and we
Yeah.
go into another build. And I was like, okay, we're doing this.
Mhm.
And it was, but to me, that was like the magic, was
Yeah.
like stuff like that. But that's why I firmly believe that the drummer really is the foundation in music.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, I think ultimately it was one of those things where my, like, the area I wrestled with in the church at least, was like I learned the power that is involved, like the power music has to dynamically fluctuate a room and to change the what's happening
atmosphere.
and stirring in people.
Yeah.
I learned that, which is a skill set to have for sure.
Yeah.
But it was definitely something in the church, at least, though, I wrestled with, because the problem is that once you know you have that power, is to dissect or to um figure out when is this me just deciding I'm gonna take over, and when is this something that I feel like I'm doing out of a reaction from a moment that I feel like we should be doing,
Heavy.
or when is it a thing that like I just want to do this
It's
because it's gonna be
heavy.
great. And
Heavy.
not to say that in those moments it wasn't great, and not to say that people didn't feel those things and they didn't, but the difference, at least in terms of church and in terms of like the dynamic of the church world, if you subscribe or understand or feel those things, and the difference between saying like, oh, I was led by the spirit to do this, therefore I did it, versus I was led by my ego
Yes.
to drive this thing. And the reality that even when it was led by my ego, it still did things,
Yeah.
but it was just constant wrestling of being like, what are we really doing here?
Yeah.
Because it does feel like sometimes it's like we can manipulate the room. And that thing that I wrestled with there, though, was a byproduct of what I had just learned in sense of like the power music has over the soul, over people, over all those things. And so when it came later on to building music outside of there, is that doesn't change.
No.
Like the power the music has over the soul doesn't change
Never
whether or not
changes.
you believe in a god or you
Or
don't.
not. It
Like
still moves you.
it is. It's just one of
Across
those.
languages,
Yeah.
across religions. It
Yeah.
literally can move you regardless of
Yeah.
what differences you might have.
Well, and like just thinking about like instantly, I think of, let's anytime you think of like, oh, there's that like clip that someone shared on Facebook and it's this like tearjerker thing. Like the reality is that the clip and the words are not the tearjerker.
The
The clip and the words
music.
that are met by the music are the thing that make you get there.
The reason why Unsolved Mysteries scares the shit out of me is
Music.
because of the music.
Well, music is all of it and all of that stuff. If there's no music, you wouldn't feel shit.
It's true.
If
And it's like such a heavy, it's a heavy thing to carry. I think that like, um, I, I'm not that much of a churchgoer now, but my approach to the music is very similar in the sense that like I look at it as I am a vessel producing something.
Mhm.
And so like I think that I don't want to get in the way of that thing because I think that the time and effort that it took to create that thing is what counts and that will carry through regardless. And so like I think sometimes musicians can get in the way of like that feeling because they're trying too hard to
Yeah.
manipulate something out of it. But if you just let the music be what it is or what it was intended to be, that it doesn't really matter what you do at the end, but that is a really tough thing in like the church scene.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah, and that's kind of been, I feel like, the overall consensus I've kind of gathered from all the people that I'm still in contact with who all have, and many of which still do stuff in there.
Yep.
Honestly, I would still like, I mean, I've every now and then it has come up where it just hasn't worked out, but like I appreciate it. And it's and I appreciate it because like at the end of the day, a lot of the approach or the end desire for why the music's being is created is up the alley of why I like music to begin with. Music's always been an emotional thing for me.
Yeah.
Like music, I've always chased after music that makes me feel something. If music
Yeah.
doesn't make me feel something,
What's the point?
what's the point? Granted, there's lots of music that make me think about things too, but the thought also makes me feel something.
Yes.
And there's something that stirs it in. And if I can find music that does both, that's like
Let's go.
but that's just always been the way I've drawn myself into music.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, I could draw these things that all tie in. like going back to like those are probably things or like why I didn't spend countless hours playing an instrument because learning skills didn't do something on the kind of EQ side of it.
Yeah.
Like it just didn't fulfill me in feeling.
Yep.
Like doing those like that doesn't make me feel something. Like it
Yeah.
might make me appreciate or it might make me understand whatever, but it didn't make me feel. And that's all I've ever fucking cared about when it comes to music is I want to feel something. And if you don't make me feel something, then I'm not really interested.
I can't tell you how many times when we were traveling as a choir, singing in different languages, going to different countries. Like we went when we were in Russia, particularly. We were in Russia and we were singing this French song. And I know that like languages kind of correlate sometimes.
Mm.
But for some reason I didn't feel like that was the case here, but the message was still it was still able to like cross those barriers, and I think I think it's the feeling that changes it. You might not know exactly where a song comes from, why it came about, and you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
The point is does it make you feel something, and does that line up? I think that that's what separates a good song from a great song.
Yeah.
Is that difference. The ability to be able to make somebody feel. It's like a heavy thing to carry, but and it's something that you should carry with responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
But it's such a gift to be able to like embark that like on a crowd of people.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing more beautiful, and I think that that's why music is why we're mourning so much of it, because we're missing feeling something collectively at the same moment all
Right.
together.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's something we kind of talked about this last night when we were at Coomber.
Shout out Cumber.
And we were talking about the ability to, even when it comes down to just someone with just a good, like just me and a guitar, and um the dynamic difference there is between people who do that well and people who don't. There's lots of people who play in a band, who lead a band, who can sing great
Yeah.
and who can play guitar. But when it comes time to doing it with just them and their guitar in front of a group of people, they can play and that's fine. And then there's people who captivate and they draw you in,
Yeah.
and they do it because there's a thing that happens where they become one with what they're doing vocally and what they're playing, and they're this push and pull and give and take, and this thing that's leaning in and out and kind of ebb and flows, and it draws the listener in the way that they can go dynamically really high and then suddenly swoop it to kind of like suck the feet out from under it.
Yeah.
And there's people who just do that naturally and get it, and who do it well. I think you're one of those people that do it really well. And we were talking about like people like Tyler Childers,
Yes.
who just has that, like, and it's a combination of like where he puts his singing voice,
Yeah.
like where he sings from.
Yeah.
It has a natural tendency to have that. Also, and then, but he just has a thing also in the way that he plays. Like when you see him, he's one of those guys where I've gone down and I've watched hours
Those YouTube
of
vids.
videos.
Yeah.
Like there's no way that there's a single video of him playing that I have not seen.
He's so good.
And it's just because, and he just has that thing that just is like, even on a screen,
Yeah.
I can watch it and I
And you
can watch
still
this.
feel it. I think I'm like careful to say this because I feel like it can be faked sometimes and you can still get the same result. But
Sure.
I feel like sometimes authenticity is like what separates like what really can break through the screen
Mhm.
and break through a performance.
Right.
And I think that that's why like when we were at Coomer last night and we were talking about this. I think the thing that really makes people great is their believability.
Mm-hmm.
If they believe what they're saying and what they're singing. And to me, what you say and what you sing doesn't mean shit to me if I don't think it's coming from a real place.
Right.
But if you're talking to me about something and it feels real and I could see that it's authentically something that you've experienced, it floods me.
Yeah.
It completely drowns me in that emotion and I'm overcome by that.
Right.
And I think that that's what I feel when I listen to Tyler is that he sweeps over me this insane blanket of emotion that I don't want to leave.
Right.
Like it's to me that's spiritual.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's that you nailed it. Like that's the thing I always talk about is the believability.
Yeah.
Is that like when you're seeing something like when the things that draw me into people is like I want to believe when you're singing about X, Y, and Z, I want to believe it. Here's the caveat. Whether or not you believe it, I don't fucking care. Like your role as an artist and like doing what you're doing is to deliver it in a way that
Yes.
makes me believe.
That's what matters.
That's what matters.
Yes.
I'm okay with if I go back later on and I maybe learn that
You didn't give a shit about it.
whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
I don't really care. The fact of the matter is that in that moment you're able to project and convey in a way that makes it believable.
Yep.
Makes it believable. It doesn't have to be true, but you do it in a way that makes it believable. And that's the thing. And like this, I mean, cheesy and corny as it might be, but like going back to, Megan and I watching The Voice and stuff like that, that's one of the things that comes up more often than not. It's sometimes we'll be sitting there and like some singer will come out and, their chairs are all turned so they can't see them and they might look the part and all that stuff and they start singing and their voice might actually sound really good.
Yes.
And visually looking at them, you're like, oh my God, they're like
They
kind
might
of
be
the
marketable.
full packet,
Yeah.
all this stuff. And what'll happen is no one will turn around.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'll be like, what the fuck? And then without fail though, every time that happens, what happens is they'll turn around and their comment will have something to do about like there was something vocally that I just didn't connect or it wasn't believable or like and not maybe not saying it in that sense, but it has that overall like
As a musician, that is the most crushing thing to hear.
yeah.
As a singer-songwriter, the most crushing thing to me.
Yeah.
I don't give a shit if I'm flat, if I'm off tempo. When somebody walks up to me and they're like, I don't really think that you really mean
Right.
what you're singing. And I might not, but the fact that they don't believe me, I'm like,
Right. And this goes back to again, circling
messed
back to like the difference between skill
yes.
and all those things is it's like you could sing a song that is by definition perfect. And the difference between someone who might sing it completely imperfect but them have it like those intricacies and the things that are imperfect might make it more believable.
Every time.
And those are the things that like when in records I hear where it's just raw and it's not this thing that's perfect because the reality is that most things that are authentic are not perfect. They're
True.
going to have like these weird things that kind
Little
of stand out or
flaws.
whatever. But the flaws are the thing that make them like what they are. They're the flaws are what build them character. And that's no different than us as people. Like,
Yep.
like if we were all just perfect fucking people, we'd be bored as shit.
Hell yes. Yes.
Like,
Truth.
I mean, that's just like straight up. Like, we're not attracted to perfect people.
No.
Like when you're attracted to your significant other, it's not because they were a perfect person.
Flaws and
Like
all.
more often than not, like the flaws are the thing that gave them character, and the flaws are the things that like you might not be attracted to the flaw, but the flaws that
Create the person.
create. Yeah,
Yeah. And I think that that's like that gave me a brand new light into like music, because as I spent most of my life being a vocalist, seeking perfection was always what I wanted. And I spent 13 years studying a technique to
Yeah.
perfect
Yeah.
my voice, only to find
Yeah.
out that yes, it's important to develop technique. I'm not taking that away. Singers that are singing incorrectly, like, check your shit. Like, it's really important to know good technique to protect you. But in developing your sound,
Yeah.
you have to still stay true to that sound that you have. And after spending so much time like working on that, it took so much time for me to be like, well, I need to like pump the brakes on this. It's not all about like always having the perfect placement, because that stifles the emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And in so many different artists, just today I was on one of those like YouTube videos where I just went down a rabbit hole, and it was like showcasing the best and worst performances of like people that I respect as vocalists.
Mm-hmm.
Jessie J being like one of my most favorites. Like, I love her so much, it's ridiculous. Shout out to Jessie, when you hear this, call me, slide in my DMs.
Same.
Yeah. But they like took like one of her bad performances, and I was like, that wasn't bad.
You're like, that's bad.
If that's what you call bad,
Yeah.
then you're dumb. Like,
Yeah.
you're straight dumb.
Like, you are dumb.
Yeah.
Like, for real.
For real. Yeah, exactly. It was ridiculous, but because to me, like, emotion is going to get in the way of things, because emotion is not supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to be messy. It's supposed to be it's not supposed to fit in the right space, and that's what makes it beautiful. That's why I respect people like her. Brandy Carla is a perfect example of that. Her voice beautifully and majestically breaks on her songs, and I worship those parts.
The breaking point's always the best. It's like,
God.
yeah. That's so. Well, what's funny is that, so I was thinking about too, like, we've talked about a lot that's come up, and we've talked about like country.
Yeah.
But you have like, as someone who's a vocal like person, who has vocal training, who like cares about like the dynamics and basics of like, this is what vocal would be. You've don't shake your head at me, because you but like talking about how like you have issues with country music because of the way it lends vocally. Sometimes, but in saying that, it because of the way you can slide in and slide out of notes, so you're not having to be technically, you don't have to be as on.
I would say this, to be clear.
Ooh, okay.
Sometimes people will do it stylistically. And there is a huge difference between the people that choose to do it stylistically, and then there are some times where people will do it because they know that it covers their mistakes.
Sure.
There is a huge difference between the two, and I feel like people that study voice are the people that can like understand the difference between the both.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times people will choose, and this makes me sad, because I feel like in the last few months I've really discovered country music in a totally different way. And I deserve put some respect on my name for that.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming on that. I've been working so hard at that.
Like 3 years.
Yeah.
Like, at least, I would say.
It's been so rough trying to get you here.
Poor thing.
I'm so happy that you're here, though.
I'm happy to be here, though, because I didn't know that there was such a variety in country music. It's really opened my eyes in I never thought I would ever say this. It's really opened my eyes in such a different way. I'm still picky as hell when it comes to like certain things, but I've always felt like I could find an appreciation for music regardless if it's like my taste or not. in country music especially, though, I feel like in the last few months I've done a lot more digging. You've obviously assisted in that. To be able to find like people that are like really fucking fantastic and so talented. So it's changed my mind a lot
Yeah.
in that respect. So congratulations to you.
Yeah, that was I knew we'd get there. I knew we'd get there.
You better release this video footage because he is smiling way too hard right now.
Well, so it's like it kind of circles back to, even talking about the whole thing about like talent. When I talked about like even playing like as a drummer, like there's so many things that I do that cover the gap on where like talent might stop. Where like talent, I might not have the ability per se to do this thing that should be done that way, but I've found a way to mask it through something else.
Interesting.
And that's the way that I look at like when you talk about like the vocal stuff. Granted, this is also like your perspective on how you view vocals is probably the same perspective that really talented, well-versed and studied drummers probably might look at when they might see me playing on a gig,
Truth.
or they might, or even hearing me talk about it in that
Or
way.
other vocalists might see me singing. Like I think that there's like I feel like I am a true pitch bitch, but I'm sure
Hashtag pitch bitch. Oh wow. Okay,
but
that's gonna be the title of this podcast, pitch bitch.
But I think that I'm sure that there are other people that are like that Hollander. She's not always on, and I know that I'm not. There have been plenty of times. I was thinking about just today. I played Halloween and I put a spell on you, but I did like then oh damn it, Nina Simone version. I think I did that. And so it was totally. It's like more of a jazzy feel, and I let my voice break on a lot of it, and I was like, there are gonna be people that are gonna think that this is like such a mess. But in my head, I was like, this is stylistically chosen. So it's so different. So I think that like a lot of times the flaws are like in the eye of the beholder, I guess.
Yeah. And I see where you're coming from, where if it's just like people are just are doing, they're like, well, I'm not a very good singer, so I'm gonna go
Some
sing
people
this
are
thing that feels,
lazy.
which again, going back to that, that's where I fall into too. I could go put in hours and hours of work if that's really what I cared to do.
But you also know your craft ins and outs.
No, I mean I do. I know how
You do.
I know how to execute what I want to do.
There are certain
most of the time.
singers that don't want to
But-
do the work to strengthen their vocal cords, and then they'll just be like, oh, instead of doing what I'm supposed to do here, I'll just half-ass it. I don't have respect for that.
Yeah. I guess the way, like for me with some of that, I view it as again like big picture with some of those things of just being like it wasn't about the vocal part.
Yes.
It was about the whole piece. It was about the lyrics. It was about all these other things. Someone, when I look at things like Nikki Lane,
Yeah.
like Nikki Lane vocally is not the strongest singer. But I appreciate like her records and I appreciate her live. And even when she is not singing, when I know that, how many people I know off the top of my head who can out-sing her, 7 nights a week.
She's strong in her lane, though.
But she is executing in her lane as far as like she knows where she resides, and she resides in the space that where people aren't as concerned about that. They're more concerned about like the final product of like the whole band and the image and the everything that comes along with that.
Yeah.
So there's definitely.
But I still think there's like a distinct, at least for me.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a distinct difference between somebody who's like, I'm staying in my lane here,
Right.
and somebody who's like, I'm too lazy to put the work in.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to use this as an excuse.
Yeah.
And I only say that because as a vocalist, I've come across other vocalists that are like, I don't want to do this for so long, so
Waiting
I'm
for
just
you
going
to
to do
throw
this.
people under the bus.
I'm not. I have to drink a little bit more of this for me to get to that point. I don't want to do it. I don't want to. But I know that there are.
Yeah.
I've worked with. There were times where I've played with a lot of people like that,
Yeah.
and that's okay if that's your ceiling. Like that's okay if that's your ceiling. But I think that there's a difference between like being so strong in your strengths and being too lazy to like
Yeah.
do the work. I would say that's a difference.
Respect.
And unfortunately, I think that it makes me sad that I think that people look to country music as a way of escaping that. But I think that country music deserves more than that. It does.
It does. And well, and there's obviously
tons of people that are
countless
doing it.
that are
that are doing
that
it
have done and continue-
justice.
Yeah.
Yes. Totally true.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. All right. Well, what's next?
Woo! So next, my plan is to possibly release in the next few months EP.
You're staring at me like
That's like my hope. I've got a few songs I can't wait anymore. Like
yeah.
the shutdown's been enough. I need to get back to work. So I'd like to do that. I'd also, in the process of releasing those songs, I would also like to work on a full-length record. I think that, we've sat down and talked about putting together like a true Americana record, which is really what my mind and heart is set on. I think we have plenty of material to choose from. And I want to branch out a little bit and try some new stuff. So I really want to do that.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Let's go.
All right. Why don't you say we wrap it up?
Yeah.
We do have cheers. Cheers.